Chapter 426, Most Terrible Battle. The fiend shifted its weight, then lunged forward with a shrill giggle. It was terrifyingly powerful and fast, but because its movements were clearly telegraphed, Sonny had plenty of time to react. Diving under the long arm of the abomination, he narrowly avoided being torn apart by the sharp talons and lashed out with the cruel sight. As the silver blade bit into the abdomen of the creature, piercing its tough skin just under the ribs, he continued forward and spun. Just a split second later, Sonny was already behind the enemy. However, he wasn't safe. Without pausing even for a moment, the bizarre monstrosity pressed its hands against the ground and then kicked back with both legs. There was enough power in that strike to shatter a small hill, but Sonny was already moving, getting out of range. He had not observed how the fiend fought against the chained worms for nothing. He knew that the wretched thing could use all four of its limbs to attack, and that its joints seemed to be able to bend in any direction. Not only did he know what the abomination was capable of, he also knew what it liked and tended to do. He also knew where it was most vulnerable, and where none of his weapons would be able to do any harm. That's why he had aimed for its gaunt body instead of the much larger and obvious target, the chest itself. Sonny had always been very perceptive, and practicing shadow dance only sharpened his ability to observe and understand such things. Maybe it was thanks to that he had managed to learn so much about the fiend so fast. As the soles of his boots scraped against the dark stone, a fleeting thought passed through his mind. How would it feel to shadow a nightmare creature, I wonder? Then, he had no more time for unnecessary thoughts. Crushing through blackened bones, the abomination bent its joints in the opposite direction of where they were supposed to turn, spun, and lunged at him once again. This time it was moving on all fours, the lid of the chest serving as its lower jaw. That made it almost impossible for him to dodge out of the way. Sonny had no idea why the golden coins weren't spilling out, but luckily they seemed to be held in place by some strange force. Unable to use his maimed arm to help himself keep balance, he had no choice but to jump down and roll under the attacking fiend. The cruel sight flashed again, leaving a deep cut on the leg of the creature. At the same time, a pulse of sharp pain radiated through Sonny's entire body. Even though he took care to protect his broken bones, he couldn't keep them from scraping against one another completely. But the worst pain was still to come. That is going to hurt. Sonny had already known that he would not be able to get back to his feet before the next attack came. Due to the fact that the abomination would have to perform it from an awkward position, it was not going to be as devastating as the previous blows. The crushing had also become considerable enough to slow down both of their movements. But those long and sharp talons were absolutely deadly, even if there was not much force behind them. As the fiend pivoted and snapped one of its limbs in his direction, Sonny sent both of his shadows from his body to encompass the puppeteer's shroud. A moment later, the talons slashed across his torso and slid from the lusterless black leather of the chest guard without piercing it. The strike itself, however, was still powerful enough to throw Sonny flying back. He counted on that, though, and used the momentum to create distance between himself and the vile creature. Landing on his feet, Sonny suppressed a groan and brandished the cruel sight once again. As the heavenly chain rattled, twisted rock rose even higher, and the burden of the crushing suddenly pressed him down even more. Some time later, Sonny was on the verge of passing out from exhaustion and pain. "Arg, curse you!" He staggered back and hunched over, using the shaft of the cruel sight to keep himself standing upright. His breath was ragged and pained, and drops of both sweat and blood were rolling down his face. Things were not going great. For the both of them, actually. The ferocious clash between himself and the vile, giggling fiend had gone for much longer than either of them had ever expected. After the first few minutes, it had become apparent that neither one could easily kill the other. Sonny was too devious and slippery to be caught by the bizarre creature, and the damned chest monster was too vigorous and resilient to succumb to the dozens of shallow wounds that Sonny had delivered to it. What's worse, all of its vital organs seemed to be hidden inside the chest, which was nearly indestructible. It was the most terrible battle of all, a battle between two cockroaches. As the result, their fight lasted for a simply stupid amount of time. By now, both were in rough shape. Sonny was almost dead from exhaustion, bleeding from several ugly wounds, and in a world of pain. The abomination looked even worse. Its gaunt body seemed to have gone through a meat grinder, and its long tongue was hanging lifelessly over the edge of the chest, not even trying to move. Neither was ready to give up, though. The fiend panted heavily and stared at Sonny. Then it giggled once again. This time the giggle sounded tired, slightly bewildered but mostly full of searing hatred. The bastard really wanted to rip Sonny to shreds now. Staggering forward, it tried to swipe at him with one hand, but crashed heavily to the ground instead. Lying there motionlessly, the bizarre creature let out a despondent growl. The crushing was almost unbearable by now. Sonny wasn't sure that he would be able to withstand it for much longer, so the abomination had to be having an extremely rough time too. In fact, it was certainly being tortured by the oppressive force much more. Very soon both of them were going to be completely immobilized. He just had to kill it before that happened. Not sure that he would be able to take another step. Sonny extended the cruel sight to its full length and thrust it forward. The silver blade pierced the skin of the fiend, causing more black blood to seep out. Good, bleed to death, you piece of crap. He could feel the enhancement of the blood blossom become a tiny bit stronger, but at this point it was already meaningless. The charm was just an awakened memory of the second tier, after all. Whatever boost it could provide was not that substantial when dealing with fallen nightmare creatures and ascended weapons, especially past the point where the incremental increases in its potency were truly substantial. The abomination tried to dodge the attack, but failed to move fast enough due to the merciless pressure of the crushing. It tried to stand up, but failed. A grim smile appeared on Sonny's face. Got you. His enemy, it seemed, was now completely helpless. But Sonny could still move. He could still attack. He had not even used any of the shadow essence that had been accumulating in his cores this whole time. The reserves weren't large, but there was some. Retrieving his spear, he gathered his strength, and then thrust it forward again, delivering another wound to the bizarre creature. And then again. And then. Die. Just die already. And then, the fiend giggled mockingly, and suddenly gathered its limbs, which then disappeared into the bottom of the chest. A few seconds later, the whole body of the creature was out of sight, leaving only the adamantine, indestructible chest standing in the middle of the stone island. The tip of the spear scraped against the dark wood, not leaving even a scratch on it. Sonny stared at it, dumbfounded. Then, he let out a yelp, and as the power of the crushing increased even further, fell to his knees. What the hell? Come back here, you coward. His hands trembled from strain as he lifted the cruel sight and struck the chest once again, to no result whatsoever. Sonny seemed to have overexerted himself with that last strike, because the spear fell out of his hands and plunged to the ground, striking the stone with enough force to send a few cracks through it. Then it bounced and rolled away, finally getting caught on a piece of bone about 2 meters away. He stared at the cruel sight with a shocked expression, and then dismissed the memory instead of trying to walk or crawl that far to retrieve it. Sonny turned to the chest and gritted his teeth. A moment later, sparks of light appeared around his hand again. Don't think that it's over. The lid of the chest trembled, and then rose a bit. The creature clearly strained to achieve even that much. A gloating, hateful giggle emerged from the depths of it a moment later. That was the exact moment when Sonny tossed a polished crimson gem that had appeared in his hand toward the chest. Just a split second after the broken oath flew inside the abomination's maw, the lid snapped close, pressed down by the obliterating force of the crushing. A muffled sound resounded from within the chest, but no matter how much the lid trembled, it didn't rise again. Sonny fell to the ground and laughed, then groaned and whimpered as he arduously crawled a few meters away, and finally grew still just outside of the broken oath's soul-destroying reach. Laying there in complete exhaustion, unable to move anymore, Sonny grinned. Who's laughing now? Try to swallow that, you bastard. Chapter 427, Death of a Mimic. The twisted rock soared higher and higher into the sky, and as it did, a terrible crushing force assaulted the 2 living beings that were pressed into its surface, separated only by a dozen meters of dark stone. The large adamantine chest did not look too good. The wood was slowly losing its color. The strips of metal reinforcing it showed growing patches of rust. It seemed as though the creature was struck by some terrible disease. In a sense, it was, after all. The broken oath was currently destroying its soul bit by little bit. Sonny did not look that much better, though. He was laying on the hard stone, looking at the merciless skies, struggling to breathe and endure the pain. His armor was soaked in blood, and his broken arm was pressed tightly against his chest. His face was deathly pale, almost the same color as the tall and majestic ivory tower that floated high above the world, shrouded in the whitest of clouds. Every breath was a torture. Sonny knew that he was not going to bleed to death because of the blood weave, but the wounds still needed to be tended to. His broken bones especially were in need of attention. This crushing was turning out to be tragically long, though, not giving him the chance to do so. Well, that was not a surprise. The single chain connecting the twisted rock to the rest of the isles was much longer than most, which meant that the small island was going to rise very, very high. Higher than Sonny had ever been in this strange and deadly land. The crushing was not only going to last longer, but would also be vastly more terrible than the few previous times he had experienced it. By now, the hours of hardship he had endured together with Master Roan several days ago seemed like a pleasant walk in the park. Now, it seemed as though he was being slowly crushed under the weight of the entirety of heaven. Sonny was only alive because he didn't have to hide his powers anymore, and could use all of his abilities without restraint. Unlike on the day he had met the dashing Griffin Rider, both shadows were now tightly wrapped around his body, augmenting its resilience threefold. For that reason, he had not turned into a puddle of bloody goo yet, although it certainly felt as though he was getting close. If things became really unbearable, he could still escape into the shadows and either wait out the worst part of the crushing or try to escape back to the heavenly chain before his shadow essence ran out. Since he had spent this whole time patiently circulating it through the coils of the soul serpent, there was a considerable amount flowing through his cores by now. He had also spent this whole time waiting for the damn chest fiend to finally die, as well as considering his options on how to transport the gold coins back to the sanctuary of Noctis. Since it had turned out that only the upper layer of the treasure pile was real, he now had much more options. However, all of them required him to burn through a lot of essence to cross back through the swarm of chain worms. The problem was confounded by the fact that Twisted Rock was going to be destroyed soon, which meant that he could not risk making several trips to the Citadel and back. He had to carry his spoils away, while the island was still attached to the rest of the chained isles. For that reason, Sonny was trying to endure as much of the crushing as he could, before turning into a shadow. He also did not forget about the strange way his intuition had reacted to the dying island. Before the burden of the crushing became too overbearing, he had sent one of his shadows to scour the whole place in search of anything that might have been important enough to affect the strings of fate. However, there was literally nothing on the twisted rock except for barren stone and ancient blackened bones. The shadow explored every nook and cranny of this miserable place, only to find nothing at all. He had even sent it to take a look at the underside of the small isle, but it was as empty and desolate as the rest of it. Sonny was left very confused by that turn of events. He was certain that there was nowhere on the twisted rock that he had failed to search, and yet there was nothing on the island to cause his intuition to react so strongly. What was going on? Had he failed to notice something, or was he mistaken about the whole thing, to begin with? Sadly, after a while, the crushing had become too terrible for him to endure without the help of the second shadow, so he had to call it back. And now here they were. A sudden sound attracted Sonny's attention. Glancing sideways, he noticed that a crack had appeared on the surface of the adamantine chest. Black blood seeped out of it, soon turning into a stream. A few seconds later, a second crack appeared near the first. He would have smiled if not for the fact that even such a simple action was rather strenuous now. This high above the sky below. It's not going to be too long now. A few minutes later, there was a pool of black blood surrounding the large wooden chest. Sonny endured the pain and counted the seconds. Before he reached 1,000, the vile creature trembled slightly and giggled one last time, its grating voice full of doleful outrage. Then the bizarre monstrosity shuddered and grew absolutely still. It was finally dead. Sonny couldn't help but grin slightly. Finally, all those coins are mine. As the heavenly chain rattled and groaned, the voice of the spell resounded above the hellish stone island. Its words sounded like music to his ears. You have slain a fallen devil, mordant mimic. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. Chapter 428, Covetous Coffer. Despite the torturous burden of the crushing, Sunny couldn't help but feel jubilant. Not only did he receive 8 shadow fragments and a powerful memory, he had also defeated a fallen devil all by himself, without even Saint providing him any help. The Black Knight, too, had been a fallen devil, so killing one solo meant a lot to Sunny. It was a poignant milestone that made him feel like all his hard work and all the vile things he had gone through were not for nothing. He was accomplishing his goal, growing stronger. Of course, the mordant mimic was not as terrifying of a foe in battle as the guardian of the ruined cathedral had been. One was a creature that seemed to have been created solely for combat, while the other mostly relied on deceit and ambushing its prey to achieve victory. And yet, the chest fiend was by no means an easy foe. If anything, its devilish nature only made it that much more dangerous. Arg! As the twisted rock rose higher, the crushing struck at Sunny with even more dreadful force, making his mirth dissipate in a wave of miserable suffering. A muffled groan escaped from his lips. Endure, just endure a bit more. This hell is going to end soon. For now, he had no choice but to keep suffering, wait, and stare at the distant silhouette of the ivory tower. The beautiful pagoda seemed so close now that he could almost imagine himself reaching out and encompassing it in his fist. With nothing else to do, Sunny summoned the runes and found the familiar cluster out of habit. Shadow fragments, 223/2000. I wonder how many coins are in that damned chest. Would he be able to create the 3rd core with their help? Shifting his gaze, Sunny found the runes describing his memories. A new one was now shown at the end of the list. His eyes glistened slightly as he concentrated on it and read the description. Memory. Covetous Coffer. Memory rank? Ascended. Memory tier IV. Huh. Sunny really couldn't believe his fortune. This was the 2nd ascended memory of the 4th tier that he had acquired in a span of just a few days. Even without considering the main boon of the expedition, the miraculous coins, this journey had already proved to be incredibly fruitful. But what kind of a memory would the bizarre carnivorous chest leave behind? Curious, he read on. Memory type tool. A utility memory. While not as showy as armors and weapons, utility memories were the foundation of every Awaken's arsenal. Take Sunny, for example. Some of his most precious memories were tools. Endless Spring, Ordinary Rock, Silver Bell, even Weaver's Mask. Excited, he tried to forget about the obliterating pressure of the crushing and concentrate on the runes. Memory description. You are very strange, said Noctis. Why was his new friend so deathly afraid of chests? Why was he so timid and pale? Don't be afraid. These are just my treasure chests. They won't bite. Well, except for this one. This one will eat you alive. Sunny blinked. That is interesting. So Noctis of the Sanctuary of Noctis was a person after all. What's more, he or she had apparently been in possession of several treasure chests, including one that could eat people alive. Had the mordant mimic once been a pet of this Noctis? If so, what kind of a person would keep a fallen devil as a pet? Suddenly full of dread, Sunny continued to read. Memory enchantments. Mendacious coffer, capacious chest, locomotive chiffonier, lurid trunk. Sunny stared at the runes with a deadpan expression. What do all these words even mean? Struggling to understand the names of the enchantments, he wondered if the spell was having a stroke and shifted his gaze to the descriptions. Mendacious coffer, enchantment description. This memory can mimic the form of any inanimate object. The size and intricacy of the simulacrum are dependent on the wielder's soul core capacity. Makes sense. I am sure that the mimic only assumed the form of a chest, instead of being born created. As one. I wonder what kind of a shape I can currently manage, though. He studied the runes again. Capacious chest enchantment description. This memory is bigger on the inside. It can be summoned and dismissed while storing inanimate items. The size of the storage space, as well as the maximum weight of stored items, are dependent on the wielder's soul core capacity. Sunny suppressed the desire to grin. Yes, this was exactly what he needed right now. This enchantment solved the exact problem he was facing: the need to carry all the gold coins away before Twisted Rock was destroyed. Once again, luck was on his side. But that wasn't all. The ability to store items in the covetous coffer, and then store the coffer in his soul sea, opened up a sea of possibilities. In a sense, it was just like Effie's incredible bag. But better, the bag had to be carried around if there was anything inside of it, while the coffer could be stashed away until needed. And if so, could Sunny bring items from the dream realm to the real world with its help? He couldn't wait to find out. Thinking of all the money he would make, Sunny turned his attention to the remaining enchantments. Locomotive Chiffonniere, enchantment description. This memory can move around and follow its wielder. Nice. That will solve the problem of having to carry all the items if I store too much inside. They are still going to weigh a ton after all. Lurid trunk enchantment description. This memory will protect itself against potential thieves by eating them. Sunny blinked. That is a bit scary. I better remain on the good side of this bizarre memory, huh? Overall, he was incredibly happy with the covetous coffer. This new utility memory of his was simply fantastic. Not only was it capable of solving his current predicament, it would also make his future ventures into the dream realm much more comfortable and efficient. Not to mention the possibility of being able to bring soul shards into the real world with its help, and selling them there at a high price. Soul shards meant money, and money meant being able to purchase memories. With more memories at his disposal, Sunny would be able to bring Saint to 200 shadow fragments faster, which would hopefully make the two of them vastly more powerful. Now, he just had to survive the crushing. He was almost ready to give up and turn into a shadow when the heavenly chain finally drew taut, stopping the rise of the Twisted Rock. One more deafening rattle rolled through the air, and then everything grew quiet. The crushing was at its peak now. Sunny was hurting terribly, but still able to withstand it. He just had to endure until the island entered the descent phase, and the pressure would slowly start to reduce. Sunny strained his chest and drew in a hoarse breath. Thank gods. However, before he could feel any relief, the whole island suddenly shuddered, and a strange piercing noise assaulted his ears. It sounded like the sound of metal being torn apart. Sunny's pupils widened. What was that? Chapter 429, Schism. A moment later, a deafening roar of massive iron links being torn apart rolled over the entire island, which then lurched up by a few meters and suddenly came to an abrupt stop. Sunny yelped, feeling the crushing assault him with even more obliterating force. The chain is failing. Why did it happen so soon? For a few moments, he felt nothing but pure, bestial panic. Then, he forced himself to regain control over his mind and threw a desperate glance toward the not-so-distant edge of the Twisted Rock. Would he be able to escape in time? He lingered for a moment, then gritted his teeth and commanded one of the shadows to slide off his body onto the ground. As soon as it did, a muffled scream escaped from his lips. It felt as though a giant hammer struck his body, making every bone in it shudder and groan. Sunny turned his head to the side and spat a mouthful of blood. Curse it all. The shadow flew to the edge of the island and slid over its edge, desperately trying to reach the dying chain. But it was too late. As Sunny watched in horror, one of the links of the heavenly tether broke. Only one, the weakest of them all, but that was all it took. No. The chain that connected Twisted Rock to the rest of the chained isles snapped in two, and as 10 kilometers of gargantuan iron links slowly fell toward the sky below, the island suddenly shot upward. Since it was still in the ascent phase and now unrestrained by anything, the speed of its rise was simply terrifying. No, no, no. The crushing struck at Sunny with such fury that he couldn't even scream. He felt himself being slowly broken and feverishly tried to come up with a solution. Step through the shadows, jump down, and try to glide to the shipwreck island. No, that would never work. There were more than 10 kilometers separating these isles from one another, which was far outside the Darkwing's capabilities. He could try to chase after the piece of the chain still connected to the shipwreck island, but chances of catching up with it were close to zero. The length of the heavenly tether was falling deceitfully slow, but it was just an illusion caused by its colossal size. In truth, the torn end of it was flying through the air at tremendous speed, moving both down and away from the twisted rock. The repulsive silhouettes of the gluttonous chain worms were growing smaller by the second. Sunny was already late to rush in pursuit of it, and every moment that passed made the probability of success lower. Great, goddamn great, you fool. You finally let your greed kill you, Sunny growled, full of fury at himself, but then suddenly stopped. No, that didn't make any sense. He was not on this island because of greed. Even though Sunny had made several risky decisions in order to get to the miraculous coins, at the end of it, standing on the edge of the shipwreck island, he put his avarice aside and made a sober choice. He came here because his intuition had told him that something on the twisted rock was very important to his future. But what was it? There was nothing but stone and bones in this damned place. What was he supposed to do? How was he supposed to survive? Sunny tried to calm down and think. He summoned his shadow back and briefly regained the ability to breathe. It wasn't going to be for long, though. The crushing was already overwhelming his physical ability to resist its lethal pressure. Sunny had a few dozen seconds, at most, before he would be forced to retreat into the shadows or die. Think there has to be a way out. Hide inside the dead mimic or the covetous coffer. No, the items inside the memory maintain their weight, which means that they too will be affected by the crushing. And even if not, what's the point? Even if the chest survives until the twisted rock itself is torn apart and plunges down into the sky below, I'll just be falling forever inside of a box instead of on my own. That's like dying inside of a coffin. And the twisted rock was going to be destroyed by the crushing, inevitably, and without a doubt. As it rose higher and higher, it was going to start to fall apart. When enough of it was destroyed to obliterate the mysterious force that kept the isles afloat, the remaining debris was going to fall down and eventually disappear into the sky below, alongside what was going to remain of Sunny. He lay motionlessly for a few seconds, then for a few seconds more. Another crack appeared on the corpse of the mordant mimic, then the stone beneath it cracked too. Sunny did not move at all. The cracks on the stone widened and crawled in every direction. A few moments later, a heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Sunny had one last gamble left. Gathering all of his strength, he groaned and pushed himself off the ground. Even though it felt as if he was lifting a mountain, and every muscle in his body trembled at the edge of bursting apart, he somehow managed to sit up. Then, Sunny summoned Weaver's mask. After returning from the Forgotten Shore and deciding to create a separate persona to investigate the Sovereigns, as well as do all the things that Sunny didn't want to be associated with his name, the one which would then accidentally become known as the famous Lord Mongrel, he had decided to never use any of the equipment that it wielded if there was even the smallest chance of someone connecting him to the mysterious masked man. But he had little choice right now. His last hope was fate. He knew that something had drawn him to the twisted rock, even though in the end he failed to find it. In the past, his intuition only reacted that strongly to the things that were connected to the gods, the unknown and Weaver. So, there was a high chance that Weaver's mask would show him the way to salvation. As the cool black wood caressed his skin, Sunny forced air into his lungs and sent his shadow essence toward the mask. He was going to do something that he dreaded doing for many months: activate the mysterious enchantment of the divine memory. When the power of his soul poured into the Weaver's mask, Sunny froze for a moment, and then let out a horrible, inhuman scream. Chapter 430, Tapestry of Fate. The moment Sunny's essence touched the black wooden surface of the divine memory, Weaver's mask suddenly reached into his very soul and hungrily drank more, and then more, and more, and more. In a fraction of a second, all of his reserve of shadow essence was sucked dry, with only a tiny bit of it remaining, almost as if these pitiful drops were not even worth being consumed by the mask. And even then, all it could achieve was activate the enchantment for just a single moment. That single moment, however, was enough to almost drive Sunny insane. Suddenly, a horrifying pain pierced his eyes, and his mind, akin to the suffering he had experienced after consuming the drop of ichor, only so much worse. Infinitely worse. As he shrieked, all traces of intelligence disappearing from his voice, the world he saw changed. Suddenly, all Sunny could see was an endless, beautiful eternity of twisting threads. Those threads transfixed everything in existence, connecting every living being and every object, every thought and every concept, every dream and every nightmare, stretching infinitely into every direction, as well as into the past, the present, and the future. These were the strings of fate. They were just like the threads of light that the spell was woven of. But while the magnificent and inconceivably complex pattern that Sunny had seen twice in the empty void between dream and reality composed the function of the spell, what he glimpsed right now connected everything. All of the universe as it had existed, was existing, and was going to exist. Much worse, when observing the weave of the spell, Sunny could only sense and guess at its meaning. But the terrifying enchantment of Weaver's mask not only allowed him to see the tapestry of fate, but also forced the understanding of it onto him. The knowledge of everything, everywhere, all at once. Of course, such knowledge was too much for any human to endure. Just the tiniest, infinitesimal amount of it was enough to instantly destroy any living being except, maybe, for a god. Or a daemon. As blood streamed out of Sunny's nose, eyes, and mouth, and a silent scream died on his lips, he instinctively did the only thing that could save him from being obliterated by the sight of the strings of fate. He dissipated into the shadows. This was, perhaps, the reason why his eyes did not turn into smoldering embers, and his head did not just explode right there on the spot. Shadows had no eyes and no skulls, after all. However, falling into the embrace of darkness, Sunny realized with cold horror that Weaver's mask somehow was still resting on his face. When he turned into a shadow, it had turned into one, too. His vision shifted from that of a human to the colorless sight of a shadow, but he could still see the eternity of strings of fate. There were especially many of them near him. The infinite threads were tightly wrapped around his body, as well as around his soul, encompassing and piercing it. It looked almost as if he was strung on them like a small marionette. And among those threads, two shone much brighter than the rest. One was made out of pure white flame and stretched far away into the distance, leading north, toward the hollow mountains. The other was made out of beautiful golden light and led down and away from both the shipwreck island and the twisted rock, diving into the tier and disappearing into the boundless darkness of the sky below. Although it seemed as though eons had passed, in reality, it was no more than a fraction of a second. Sunny's head did not explode because he had turned into a shadow, but his mind was still on the verge of utter, irrevocable destruction. A fraction more, and it was going to be wiped out from existence by the divine knowledge of fate. But what can I do? The mask is a shadow now. His thoughts were scattered and weak, and yet he fought through the shock and managed to remember an important detail. He could dismiss the memory, but that would be too slow. Even if it took only a second, there would be nothing left of him by the end of it. A wave of desperation rose from the depths of his heart. And then, the shadow essence that Weaver's mask had absorbed finally ran out. Instantly, the enchantment deactivated, and the ruthless worlds of endless threads disappeared with it. Sunny could only see what all humans and shadows were meant to be able to see. A piece of dark stone soaring into the sky as the merciless grinder of the crushing was slowly breaking it apart. Sunny sensed hazily that there was something urgent about the situation, but he was not entirely there. Although the terrible visage of the strings of fate was gone, his mind was scattered and empty. He couldn't really lose consciousness while in the form of a shadow, but not being able to think or even recognize the existence of his self was very close to it. Soon, however, he started to slowly gather the pieces of his wounded, shattered mind back together. He was in dire danger, after all. The entire twisted rock was shaking and rumbling as it rose higher and higher into the sky above. Wide cracks appeared on its surface, growing larger with each second. The blackened bones had already been turned into dust, and now the only thing standing above the stone was the ramshackle, lopsided, dead treasure chest. the corpse of the mordant mimic, strangely seemed to be much more sturdy than the ascending island itself. It was still in one piece, at least, and almost whole. I need to come up with a plan. As this thought formed in Sonny's mind, he suddenly came to his senses and realized several things. One of them was what he had to do. The other was that the pitiful drops of shadow essence left in his soul cores were about to evaporate, which meant that he would not be able to remain in the form of a shadow for much longer. The third one was that he still had not retrieved the golden coins from inside the chest. Now, whether he lived or died depended on one thing: whether he would be forced out of the shadows and turned into a bloody puddle first, or whether the twisted rock would fall apart first. Which would it be? Well, I might as well try, right? Flowing through the shadow cast by the treasure chest, he dismissed the broken oath. A tiny amount of shadow essence, from which the memories were created, returned to his soul. Hiding on the surface of the dead mimic, Sonny dismissed the blood blossom and the puppeteer's shroud, too. Finally, he dismissed Weaver's mask, which brought him much more essence than the previous 3 memories combined, even if, in the grand scheme of things, that amount was still rather insignificant. Still, if it could gift him even 1 second more, it was worth it. Circulating his essence through the coils of the soul serpent to slow down its expenditure and enhance the speed of its regeneration, Sonny hid on the treasure chest and waited for his fate to be decided. After something that felt like an eternity, when the twisted rock had soared so high above the chained aisles that the crushing started turning smaller pieces of stone into fine dust, the island finally shuddered and cracked open. One of the rifts that opened in the blackened stone was directly beneath Sonny and the dead mimic. The whole section of the aisle suddenly broke off, separating from it in a rain of rock shards. Sonny caught a glimpse of petrified bones encased in the solidified stone, and then the chest he was hiding on floated up. For a few seconds, all of it, the remaining core of the island, the sea of stone debris, and the dead mimic, continued to rise higher and higher. Larger pieces of rock were crushed into smaller ones, and then turned into dust. A deafening thunder filled the air. But then, as if an invisible switch had been turned, the mysterious force that had kept the twisted rock floating between 2 skies for thousands of years was no more. Suddenly, everything that was too heavy to be carried away by wind slowed in its ascent, froze in the air for a few moments, and fell down. The cracked treasure chest tumbled down, too, falling toward the sky below. Sonny, who was still just a shadow adhered on its side, saw the world spin around. The last drops of his shadow essence were about to disappear. But that was fine. They would last him long enough to reach the altitude where the crushing wasn't immediately lethal anymore. When it finally happened, Sonny suddenly appeared on the surface of the chest and held onto it for dear life. The pressure of the crushing first threw him against the wood hard enough to break a few ribs, then tried to rip him away. But Sonny would not let go. His damned coins were in that damned chest. Together, he and the dead mimic fell lower and lower, until finally, the crushing weakened enough to allow Sonny to move. Summoning the dark wing, he commanded it to turn into a blur and change the direction of their fall. However, he was not trying to move toward the distant silhouette of the shipwreck island out of desperation. Instead, he was guiding the chest in the opposite direction, aiming it into the vast, empty expanse of the tear. Chapter 431, Fall from Grace. As Sonny and the treasure chest plunged through the skies into the boundless black abyss, pieces of the shattered island pursued them. The crushing was slowly growing weaker, but it was still strong enough to kill most awakened. If not for the power of his shadows, Sonny would have been long dead. And even with it, he was much closer to becoming a corpse than he would have wished to be. His whole body was bruised, bloodied, and in pain, which he could see very clearly because, in addition to being terribly banged up, Sonny was also currently completely naked. What a glorious sight. Damn it. He had dismissed the puppeteer's shroud to absorb the shadow essence spent on its summoning, and had none of it left to manifest the armor again. The last drops had been spent to summon the dark wing. As the result, Sonny found himself falling into the sky below atop a lopsided treasure chest while wearing nothing but his pack and the strip of leather holding his broken arm in place. His only hope right now was that neither Master Roan nor Saint Tyrus would suddenly appear to save the day and see him in this state. He would rather plunge into the tear than live through that embarrassment. Well, not really. I take it back. Both of them can descend from the clouds and carry me away in their arms. I won't mind. No, really. But no one came to his rescue. Dodging the heavy slabs of shattered stone and desperately trying to glide through the field of debris, Sonny slowly pushed the chest toward the empty expanse of the tier and prayed that nothing would damage his fragile cloak. It was having enough trouble obeying his commands already. The Dark Wing wasn't really designed to carry heavy weights. It could barely support just Sonny himself, and that was in normal conditions. Now that Sonny was refusing to let go of the dead mimic, and with both of them being affected by the crushing, the enchanted cloak was on the verge of breaking apart. Instead of gliding smoothly away from the falling rocks, Sonny and the treasure chest were more or less just falling between them at a slight angle. Needless to say, dodging the debris of the destroyed island in these circumstances was not easy. But somehow, Sonny managed to protect both himself and the Dark Wing for long enough to escape the danger zone in one piece. By then, the crushing had become almost bearable. Sitting on the lid of the treasure chest and feeling the terrible pressure grow weaker and weaker with each second, Sonny grimaced from pain, then let out a relieved sigh. The cool breeze was softly touching his burning face, as well as his everything. All things considered, the fall was not unpleasant. But then, a sudden thought appeared in his mind. "What are you feeling relieved about, idiot?" "Oh, right." Looking down, Sonny saw nothing but the swiftly approaching, boundless dark expanse of the sky below. The endless abyss that stretched downward forever, and from which there was no escape. Not unless one knew how to fly. That was where he was headed, except for the golden string of fate Sonny had seen disappearing into the depth of the tier. He had no reason whatsoever to believe that he would survive the fall into the sky below, let alone ever be able to return to the sanctuary in the real world. Most likely he was going to go mad and either be devoured by some terrifying abyssal titan or die of hunger. His life, almost literally, was hanging by a thread. But right now he didn't care. All he cared about was the physical relief of not being pressed down upon by the crushing. He was still wounded all over and in pain, but experiencing just the normal amount of it was almost euphoric. It's the small things that matter. Like not being constantly crushed by an invisible, murderous magical force, or resting comfortably on a wide lid of a treasure chest instead of having your limbs being crushed in its jaws. Simple stuff like that. Now that the crushing was almost gone, Sonny used the Dark Wing to push the dead mimic deeper into the tier, as well as keep it level in the air. The treasure chest was wide and long, and its lid was flat. In a sense, it was almost like a firm, narrow cot. There were worse ways to fall into an endless abyss, really. Sonny stared at the wide sweep of the tier, trying to burn the memory of the golden string of light into his mind. The tier was situated in the center of the chained aisles, and was both vast and absolutely empty. Some people believed that the ivory tower had once stood in its middle and was the first island to break free of its chains. Over thousands of years, islands that had bordered it were slowly destroyed one after another, causing the tier to grow. By now it was a couple of 100 kilometers across, and from what Sonny could tell, the string of fate led to somewhere in its very center. The question was, how deep in there was the thing on the other end of the string? The longest someone had flown down into the sky below before turning back was a week. Was the mysterious object hidden in an even deeper part of the abyss? And what was that object? Sonny could not even guess. The only thing he knew was that his intuition had pushed him toward the twisted rock because of it. If so, it should have been something that would allow him to survive, right? Of course, his fate might have been to just die there. Fate didn't really discriminate against any type of occurrence, including fatal ones. Regardless, Sonny was going to find out. It's not like he had a choice now. Feeling the air get colder, he shivered and watched the sky around him grow darker and darker. Soon there was no light left in it at all. Sonny had fallen into the sky below. Chapter 432, First Day of Nothing. This is sort of grim. Sonny was falling through a boundless, empty void of cold darkness. Far below, false stars were shimmering with pale white light. Their radiance, however, did very little to illuminate the sky below. Everywhere around him there was just nothing. Sunny was still resting atop the treasure chest, holding onto it with his one healthy hand. He had no reference point to measure how far he had traveled, but suspected that the distance was swiftly leaving the realm of mundane sense and logic. He was not very educated, however. Even he knew that a falling object would forever accelerate at a steady pace, theoretically. That meant that every second Sunny was falling, his speed was increasing exponentially. By now, it had to be simply insane. But he did not really feel that speed. All he felt were wisps of cold wind caressing his skin from time to time. If there was one good thing about the situation, it was that he had accumulated a bit of shadow essence and was able to summon the puppeteer's shroud again. So he wasn't naked anymore, at least. If there was one thing he did know, though, it was the approximate speed with which he could glide forward with the help of the dark wing. Adding the weight of the dead treasure to the equation, he could more or less calculate the distance he was covering horizontally. With that in mind, he guessed that he would reach the middle of the tier in around a day. Problem was, he had no reliable way to measure time as well. There were some clues he could try to use, like the rate of shadow essence regeneration or the state of his wounds, but they were not exactly reliable. In heroic stories, characters often found themselves in similar situations. Every time that happened, the hero somehow managed to measure the passage of time by the state of their facial hair. Sadly, despite being 18, Sunny could not grow even the most pitiful of beards. That was a real shame. I guess I'm not hero material. With a bitter sigh, he stared at the lid of the treasure chest and tried to assess his physical state. Things weren't good, but they also weren't very bad. He had sustained minor internal damage due to the crushing, as well as several rather ugly wounds in the battle against Mimic. The half-healed cuts left on his body by the mirror beast had also opened at some point, and were now hurting once again. The worst injury was, of course, his broken arm. His mental state was also somewhat in shambles after being ravaged by the visage of the strings of fate. Luckily, there seemed to be no long-lasting effects. Even the splitting headache was already growing fainter. Sunny also could not remember the exact details of what he had seen, as if his mind completely erased them from his memory to protect itself. The only thing that remained was the fragment of the memory that he had preserved on purpose. The image of the thread of golden light leading deep into the tier. Sunny stared at the black nothingness, waited for a while, then slowly exhaled. Great, now what? There was no answer. After a while, Sunny had no idea how long. He got tired of waiting for something to happen and decided to act. Might as well. The first thing he did was summon the covetous coffer. Sunny expected that an identical chest would appear near the dead one, but instead what he saw was a miniature version of it. A box made of dark wood, with strips of iron reinforcing it, appeared on the lid of the treasure chest. It was about the size of a jewelry box, but not at all elegant. In fact, the covetous coffer looked more mean than graceful somehow. As Sunny stared at it, the lid of the box raised slightly, revealing rows of sharp iron teeth. He blinked. I guess that's all I can manage with my current soul core capacity. Shaking his head, Sunny looked at the coffer and said in an uncertain tone, "Come here." Immediately, 8 short iron legs appeared from under the box, and it scurried over before plopping down near him. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, glanced at his fingers, then cautiously opened the lid of the box. Luckily, it didn't try to bite them off. Taking off his pack, Sunny transferred its contents into the box. Although it seemed rather small, the coffer swallowed all his supplies without any problem. Perfect. Sunny closed the box, patted it on the lid, and dismissed it. Then, he summoned the moonlight shard and methodically cut his now empty pack into strips of leather. Using his one healthy hand and his teeth, Sunny tied them into a semblance of a rope, then tied himself to the treasure chest, and finally calmed down. Now, his coins weren't going anywhere. Satisfied with his handiwork, Sunny rested for a bit. He was starting to feel tired and sleepy. Falling through the endless abyss turned out to be way less exciting than he had thought. In fact, it was extremely boring. There were still a lot of things he had to do, though. With a grimace, Sunny cautiously shifted his weight and crawled to the end of the chest. There, he used the moonlight shard to widen a crack on the side of the dead mimic and separate 2 long planks of wood from it. Then he made a roll out of the last strip of leather he had and bit down on it. This is going to suck. Without giving himself too much time to think about it, he removed his broken arm from its sling, and then proceeded to swiftly set the bones just like he had been taught. A sharp, blinding pain pierced his mind. When Sonny regained his vision and the ability to think straight, he saw that his arm did not look like jelly anymore. It seemed more or less straight. That will have to do. Hissing and cursing, he used the 2 planks of wood and the strip of leather to create a sturdy splint, then carefully placed it back inside the sling. Now, his broken bones had a good chance of growing back together correctly. Hopefully. After that, Sonny summoned the endless spring and the covetous coffer, took some of his remaining food out of it, and had a strangely relaxed meal on top of the dead mimic's lid. By the time he was done, the sky below did not change at all. He was still falling into its depths, slowly moving the treasure chest toward the center of the tier with the help of the dark wing. He was also absolutely exhausted. Sonny somberly stared at the distant false stars. He stared at them until his eyes started to water, and his thoughts became slow and muddy. Then he stared at them some more. After a while he thought, I can't take it anymore. By then his reserves of shadow essence were full by a third. Judging that around 24 hours had passed after the destruction of the twisted rock, Sonny sighed, then dismissed the dark wing and allowed the chest to start falling straight down. He was going to have to keep falling into the sky below for 6 more days, at least. Probably longer. Sonny shook his head, knowing full well that these estimations had almost nothing to do with reality. Then, he did something that he had never thought he would ever do. He cautiously lay down on the long lid of the dead mimic, tightened the rope connecting them together, and closed his eyes. Soon, Sonny was dead asleep, plummeting into the darkness of the abyss without a care in the world. Chapter 433. More of the same nothing. Sonny's bed trembled slightly, and he felt the wind blowing across the room. Still mostly asleep, he sighed and tried to pull the blanket higher. However, that damned thing was nowhere to be found. Where the hell is it? Reluctant to let go of sleep, he blindly searched for the blanket. Instead of finding it, though, Sonny suddenly felt his whole bed careen to the side. Startled, he opened his eyes and saw nothing but darkness surrounding him. What the? Oh, right. He wasn't in his small room in the sanctuary. He was plummeting into a lightless abyss atop the corpse of a fallen devil. Instead, Sonny stared into the darkness for a bit. Then, he yawned. Well, at least I slept well. Indeed, he was feeling rather refreshed. Most of his aches had either disappeared or grown milder, and even his wounded mind felt soothed. He felt rested, energized, and much better overall. The only problem was, he was still falling into the endless void of the sky below. Sonny scratched the back of his head, thought about this predicament, then summoned the endless spring and drank some water. Then he concentrated and tried to assess the situation. The situation was absolutely the same. He was surrounded by nothing. Nothing had changed while he slept, and there was nothing he could do about it. Sonny sighed and stared at the treasure chest beneath him. After a while, he thought, if you think about it, this is just next-level pettiness. Not only did I kill this poor bastard, I even went so far as to take a nap on top of its dead body. Talk about insulting. Somewhere down below, false stars shimmered with white light. Judging by how much of his shadow essence had regenerated, Sonny judged that he slept for about 12 hours. A bit longer than usual, but he was really exhausted after everything that had transpired. These calculations of his, of course, were very rough. But if he assumed them to be correct, that would mean that he had left the sanctuary 6 days ago. He had no idea how long it was going to take to reach the thing on the end of the golden string of fate, but had to assume that it would take at least a week, much longer than that, most likely. Back in the real world, his body was safely hidden in the luxurious sleeping pod in the basement of his house. The pod would keep it alive for months, so Sonny was not too worried about his physical well-being yet. Would anyone miss him? Probably not. Kai and Effie were used to his long ventures into the dream realm, and even if none of them had been as long as this one was going to be, they would just assume that he was too lazy to answer their messages and go about their business. They were famous heroes now, after all, with packed schedules and plenty of problems of their own. Teacher Julius didn't expect any reports from him either. The lookouts in the sanctuary were not in the habit of keeping a detailed record of who went in and out of the citadel. The most anyone was going to think about him would be when Cassie arrived from the Night Temple, and he wasn't there to help St. Tyrus receive her. But she would just think that he was avoiding her, as he had done before. Sitting on the lid of the dead treasure chest in boundless darkness, Sonny realized that no one was really going to care that he was gone. So many things had changed, but even more remained just the same. Throwing a long look at the beautiful glass bottle in his hand, Sonny remained motionless for a while, then dismissed it and knocked on the lid of the dead mimic. Whatever. I have my coins at least. Sometime later, he was performing a strange aerial dance, holding onto the rope connecting him to the dead mimic with his one functioning hand. Sonny summoned the dark wing, then cautiously climbed onto the side of the big chest and tried to balance it so that the heavy thing didn't flip. Because of the fact that both of them were plummeting down with incredible speed, his body felt pleasantly light. Sonny thought about it for a while, then frowned. How did that even make any sense? Yesterday, he had thought that the speed of his fall was going to increase exponentially, which meant that at some point his body was bound to be simply torn apart, probably. But now, he realized that his assumption was wrong, since he could breathe in the sky below and felt the wind, or rather the air moving past him as he fell through it. It meant that the speed of his fall had a limit dictated by the air resistance. He did not, however, feel that resistance too much. By all accounts, he should have been hearing the roaring of the wind and feeling it assault his body, instead of falling through the emptiness in something that resembled comfort. Common sense didn't seem to be working in the sky below. Better not think about it too much. What was the point of trying to understand the laws of a place that simply denied all logic? He had far more practical things to do. Trusting the leather rope to hold his weight, Sonny let go of it and summoned the moonlight shard. Then, perched precariously on the side of the treasure chest, he inserted the narrow blade of the ghostly stiletto between its lip and the lid and tried to pry it open. The task turned out to be far more difficult than Sonny had anticipated. Not only did he have to do everything with only one hand, he also had to balance the chest to prevent it from spinning in the empty void, as well as keep an eye on the rope, hoping nervously that it would not break. After some time and plenty of exasperated curses, however, he finally managed to pry the jaws of the dead devil open. Inside its maw, a pile of golden coins was waiting for him to claim them. A dark smile appeared on Sonny's face. Then, he let out a shaky, slightly unhinged laugh. Ah, it feels nice to be rich. Chapter 434, Absolutely Nothing. Summoning the covetous coffer, he commanded the toothy box to climb inside the bigger, toothier box and open its lid. Then, he started whistling a light-hearted melody while throwing the heavy coins inside. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ah, what a day to be alive. 5, 6. One after another, the miraculous golden discs disappeared into the coffer. After a while, Sonny shifted his weight slightly, got more comfortable, and continued gathering his spoils. In the end, he had recovered almost 1,400 coins from inside the dead devil. Just as Sonny had expected, the entire top layer of the treasure pile had turned out to be real. That was an incredible, astonishing boon. Suddenly, everything that had happened seemed worth it. Almost. Glancing at the lightless void around him, Sonny sighed. Who knows if I will even be able to return to the sanctuary? Without the altar, these coins are just dead weight. Somewhat disheartened, he lingered for a few moments, then turned his gaze back to the open treasure chest. The top layer of the treasure pile that he had successfully plundered was indeed real, but beneath it, Sonny struggled to keep the contents of his stomach inside. Beneath the treasure, the limbs and organs of the mimic were tightly packed together, taking up most of the chest's volume. The whole thing was soaked in black blood and producing a sickening stench, not to mention looking like a butcher's nightmare. Disgusting, so disgusting. Thinking about how repulsive the sight in front of him was, Sonny used the moonlight shard to cut through the terrible sludge and fished out 4 large soul shards with a wide smile on his face. After cleaning them up a little, he placed the alluring crystals inside the covetous coffer and dismissed the memory with a feeling of great satisfaction. After that, Sonny stared inside the treasure chest with a dubious expression on his face. The thing was, he only had around 3 days' worth of provisions left, stored neatly inside the covetous coffer. If he rationed his food, it would probably last him for about a week after that. Sonny scratched the back of his head, then shuddered and closed the lid of the chest with a loud thud. I'll think about it when the time comes, but hopefully it never does. With that, he climbed back onto the dead devil and rested for a while, looking into the darkness. As time slowly passed, Sonny grew more and more solemn. Finally, he came to a frightening realization. He had nothing else left to do. This is going to be a problem. An eternity later, or just a few hours, who knew, Sonny was sitting on top of the treasure chest and dying from boredom. He was still falling through the boundless dark abyss. Of course, what else would he be doing? There was nothing else to do. The cruel sight was in his hand, the silver blade shining with a bright radiance. He was using its light-eater enchantment to summon the sunlight the somber spear had absorbed and projected into the darkness of the sky below. Thanks to that light, the shapes of his 2 shadows could be clearly seen, one resting on the surface of the chest to his left, the other to his right. Sonny shook his head, then said, "I am dying of boredom here. I have never been this bored. How are we going to survive weeks of this crap? What do you guys think?" The happy shadow to his right hesitated, then raised a fist encouragingly. Its sentiment was quite clear. "You got this." The gloomy shadow to his left stared at him grimly, then simply shook its head. Its meaning was clear, too. "Just give up already." Sonny blinked a couple of times, then smiled. "Well, I think it's going to be fine. I'll just think about it as a vacation. Yeah. When was the last time I could just relax and do nothing? That's right, never. If you think about it, guys, this is a godsend opportunity. An opportunity to rest and laze about as much as I want." He remained silent for a while, then added, "I literally have no choice but to do nothing. Lucky me, right?" The gloomy shadow glanced at him, then covered its face with a palm. Even the happy shadow hesitated for a bit before giving him a timid shrug. Sonny frowned. "What do you mean, go crazy?" "I'm not going to go crazy. I'm so done with being crazy. Been there, done that, as they say. There is zero possibility that I will go crazy." The shadows didn't answer, making him huff angrily. "Whatever. Why am I even speaking to you two? It's not like you even have enough decency to pull your weight in the conversation." He scowled and dismissed the cruel sight, letting the darkness shroud everything once again. The shadows became invisible. After a while, Sonny said scornfully, "And it's not like I don't have better alternatives to talk to anyway." Where had he put the ordinary rock? By the time 3 days had passed, at least Sonny suspected that it had been 3 days, since that was how long his shadow essence usually took to fully recover without the aid of the soul serpent. He was indeed on the verge of losing his mind. It wasn't even the boredom that was the worst. It was the absolute lack of any external stimuli. Nothing ever changed in the sky below. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever appeared or disappeared or was there at all. There was nothing but empty darkness, the distant shimmering stars and him, and falling. At the start of it all, Sonny had been worried that he would encounter evil, colossal, inconceivably horrifying creatures in the abyss. That was what one would expect from an abyss, right? But there was none. By now, he almost hoped to encounter a stray titan or two. He had heard that people were prone to going insane in isolation, but never expected to be in such a situation himself. Sonny had spent the first day thinking about this and that, remembering his experiences and trying to learn something from them. He wondered about the mirror beast and the cruel sight. Why was the silver spear even called that? Then, he understood. It was called the cruel sight because its polished blade showed a person their own reflection. He wondered about the shipwreck, the coins, the mimic, and the person called Noctis. How were all of these things connected? After a while, he guessed that Noctis had been the captain of the ancient ship, the master of the mimic, and the person whose face was depicted on the miraculous coins. Noctis was also probably the one who had created the coins in the first place. That's why they could only be used in his sanctuary. He wondered about what Kai, Effie, and Cassie were doing. He wondered about Nephis. On the second day, he summoned the runes and saw that she had become a devil. Sunny stared at the counter that showed due 4,000 with a deadpan expression, then sighed and dove into the soul sea. There he had studied all of his memories and the shadows of all the creatures he had killed. That only took him a couple of hours, or an eternity. On the third day, Sunny just lay on the lid of the dead mimic and stared into the void. His mind was starting to behave in strange ways. Although there was nothing around him, Sunny could sometimes see strange shapes and silhouettes in the darkness, as well as hear distant noises. He wanted to think that they were real, but knew that it was just the result of prolonged sensory starvation. Human minds were weird that way. They couldn't really withstand a lot of nothing. Suddenly, the story of a man who had to turn back after 7 days of descending into the sky below, out of fear of going insane, made much more sense to him. To make himself perceive at least something, Sunny summoned the silver bell and rang it in the darkness, listening to the melodious ringing as it disappeared into the abyss. And now, he was sitting on the treasure chest, looking at the distant stars and speaking with the ordinary rock. "So, how has your day been, Rock?" The memory answered in his own voice. "Same old nothing, yours?" Sunny remained silent for a while, then said, "I am enjoying my vacation." The ordinary rock laughed. "Sounds wonderful. How is your vacation going?" He sighed. "Splendidly. I've yet to hit the rock bottom." For a while, there was nothing but silence. Then, a new question came. "Why is it so dark?" Sunny smiled weakly. "Why wouldn't it be dark? This is the sky below, after all." But then, he froze. What? The voice that asked the question had not come from the ordinary rock. That voice was not his own. Chapter 435, Listening to Nothing. Sunny shuddered. The voice he heard was not his own. It sounded pleasant and calm, and seemed to have come from the darkness of the sky below itself. Have I finally lost it? His first thought was that he had gone crazy again, and was now hearing things. His second thought was much less comforting. Damnation! Had he summoned some unholy titan from the depths of the sky below, after all? Sunny outstretched one hand, ready to manifest the cruel sight, but then hesitated. If the owner of the voice was not a figment of his imagination, but some harrowing being of the void, was it really wise to agitate it? Would the silver blade even do anything against it? Calm down. Calm down. Maybe you just imagined the whole thing. As if to answer his thoughts, the void laughed softly. "Ah, my apologies. I seem to have startled you." Sunny gulped. The pleasant voice seemed to belong to a young man, but no matter how hard he looked into the darkness, he couldn't see anyone or anything nearby. He was reminded of his first meeting with Kai, only this time. This time, things were much more frightening. No worries, I just didn't expect to hear another human's voice here. You are a human, right?" The void was silent for a while, then answered in a neutral tone. "A human? I used to be a human once, I guess." Sunny realized that he couldn't even pinpoint the direction from which the voice was coming. It was just there, somehow, everywhere, around him. He tensed, then asked cautiously, "Used to? Then what are you now?" The voice disappeared for a few moments, then sighed. Finally it answered, "Lost." Sunny blinked. What the hell does he mean? Lost? As in lost in the sky below? The darkness let out a sad laugh. No, not in the sky below. As Sunny felt cold shivers run down his spine, it hesitantly added, "I am sorry. I haven't spoken to anyone in a long, long time. Instead of lost, it would be more proper to say that I am one of the lost. My body in the waking world was destroyed, but my soul continues to exist here, in the dream realm. I hope that explanation is more clear." One of the lost. Sunny knew of these people, although he had never met one in person. Just like there were hollow, people whose souls were destroyed, leaving an empty body behind, there were also the lost, people whose bodies had somehow died in the real world, leaving their souls stranded in the dream realm. There wasn't a lot of them, since most of the time the soul perished shortly after the body had, but there were some. Knowing that the owner of the voice was one of these lost souls made Sunny relax a little. Not that he had any reason to believe that the stranger was telling him the truth. He could have been a nightmare creature still, or something worse. But even if he was lost, that didn't explain how they were able to converse. The lost, from what Sunny knew, were just like any other awakened in the dream realm. It was just that they couldn't return to the real world. What they certainly were not were disembodied voices coming from the void. He shifted his weight slightly, ready to do something to protect himself, if need be, and asked, "Sorry to hear that, but how is it that I am able to hear your voice but can't see you?" The voice lingered for some time, then answered with a bit of amusement, "That is a good question." Sunny waited patiently for him to expand on that answer, but that seemed to be it. A bit irritated, he said, "Well, aren't you going to explain?" Instead, the voice suddenly asked, "Why are you descending into the sky below? This is a very dangerous place." Sunny blinked a couple of times, then coughed. "Ah, that well, you see, I am not so much descending into the sky below as I am falling into it. I got stuck on an island because of the crushing, and sadly that island broke off its chain, so I had to jump off, and here I am." Then he frowned. "Wait, dangerous place. Why is it dangerous? I haven't seen anything dangerous anywhere in this dreadful pit." The voice lingered for a while, then sighed with regret. "You'll see. When you reach the stars, then you will see." Then it disappeared. Sunny stared into the darkness, a bit disturbed. A deep frown appeared on his face. "What do you mean? What will happen when I reach the stars?" But there was no answer. No matter how long Sunny waited, the voice did not speak to him again. The void was silent and empty, just as it had been before. In the end, he just massaged his temples and cursed. What the hell was that? Did he imagine the whole thing? Had his mind finally cracked? Sunny stared at the ordinary rock, as though expecting it to actually talk and corroborate his story. Sadly, the memory could only repeat the sounds it had recently heard. Wait. The sounds it had heard. Sunny hurriedly commanded the rock to repeat everything it had recorded in the past few minutes. Then, feeling cold sweat appear on his forehead, he listened to his own voice speaking to nothing. His words were repeated, but where the words of the strange voice should have been, there was nothing but silence. Dismissing the ordinary rock, Sunny clutched his hair and groaned. "Crazy, I've gone completely crazy. Curse it all. It has been just 4 days, and I'm already turning back into a lunatic." Not even a full week passed by, and he was already going insane. This is the worst vacation ever. After a while, he frowned. Despite being mostly sure that the whole thing was just a symptom of his sanity slowly breaking apart, Sunny cautiously crawled to the edge of the chest and looked down at the distant shimmering stars. Was he imagining things, or did they seem to be a little closer? Chapter 436. Nothing to worry about. After the conversation with the disembodied voice of the void, whether it was real or not, Sunny felt different. Not exactly better, but at least not as lost and unmoored as before. That would be really ironic if the voice was just a figment of my imagination, wouldn't it? The empty void around him didn't seem as empty anymore. Even if it was now full of potential danger, the danger was better than nothing. Anything was better than nothing. After 4 days spent in the endless silence of the dark abyss, Sunny realized just how terrible nothingness was. The human mind was simply not built to withstand it. In any case, he wasted some time staring at the distant stars, and then got to thinking. Now that his cores were once again full of essence, he had no tool left to measure time. After considering his options for a while, he summoned the cruel sight and activated the dark mirror enchantment. Even though he had no enemies to fight in the sky below, simply keeping the enchantment active was going to drain his shadow essence. Sunny felt that he could keep it going for about 2 hours straight. After his reserve of essence became approximately half empty, he dismissed the cruel sight and sat cross-legged in the center of the dead devil's lid. Plummeting through the lightless void, Sunny inhaled deeply and closed his eyes. Then He concentrated on the flow of essence through his body, feeling it permeate every fiber of his being, directing it into the coils of the soul serpent. He felt its flow accelerate and widen. By using the shadow, he was going to replenish all of the spent essence in about a day. That was going to be his clock from now on. Sunny exhaled, directed the shadow essence into his left hand, and concentrated it in his thumb, then in his index finger. Thanks to the soul serpent, his control of the essence was better than that of most awakened. However, it was still rather crude. Sunny innately knew how to enhance his physical attributes by expending it, but wasn't really efficient with how he did it. To him, it was a matter of instinct. He just thought about making his hand stronger, and the essence flowed like a torrent to achieve the desired effect. That was how all young awakened used it. True masters, however, were much more intricate in their control of essence. They could isolate every muscle, every nerve, every bone in their body, and only enhance those parts of it that they needed to perform an action. Their expenditure of essence was more akin to a trickle than a torrent, but achieved the same result. That's why between two awakened with similar soul core capacity, one could be able to fight at his peak physical prowess for much longer. Now that Sunny had nothing else to do, he decided to really work on this aspect of mastery over his own body and soul. He had practiced essence control before, of course, but between the constant need to hunt down nightmare creatures and the fact that Soul Serpent served as an effective replacement for months of training, not as much as he could and should have. Directing the flow of essence into his right hand, Sunny sighed and thought, vacation is over. 2 more days passed, or rather 2 cycles of spending shadow essence with the help of the cruel sight and then waiting for it to regenerate, which Sunny had decided to count as days. He spent that time meditating as he controlled the flow of the essence through his body, sleeping and feeling hungry. Now that Sunny was rationing his food, the feeling of hunger that he had forgotten ever since becoming infected by the nightmare spell returned. Even then, his supplies were on the verge of running out. He only had enough for 2 meager meals left. After that, Sunny was either going to have to starve or consider opening the treasure chest again and gnawing on the dead devil's raw meat. Both possibilities seemed rather bleak. What he was more concerned about, however, were the shimmering fake stars of the sky below. Now, he was more or less sure that they were slowly growing larger. If not for the conversation with the voice of the void, he would have never noticed the subtle change. But after being alerted to their importance and spending a lot of time observing the stars, he had become convinced that the voice, whether it was one of the lost, a nightmare creature pretending to be human, or simply a manifestation of his damaged psyche, had been right. He was slowly drawing closer to the stars burning in the deepest reaches of the abyss. If only the voice had told him why, exactly, the stars were dangerous. Luckily, on the 7th day of his plummeting through the sky below, the voice returned. Sunny was grimly eating his second-to-last piece of food and staring into the darkness, feeling his mind teetering on the verge of madness when the voice resounded from the void again. What a curious creature you are. Oh, thank the gods. Sunny choked on a piece of dried meat, took a sip of water from the endless spring to chase it down, and glanced at the empty expanse of the sky below with a dark expression. Where the hell have you been? The voice remained silent for a bit, then answered apologetically, talking like this is draining for me. I was recovering. Sunny frowned, trying to glean some information about the nature of the owner of the pleasant voice from this statement, but then gave up. He had too few clues to guess. Well, if you are about to disappear for a few days again, at least tell me what's the deal with these stars first. Why are they so dangerous? The void hesitated. You don't know? Sunny blinked. Of course I don't know. Why would I ask if I knew? When the void answered in a few moments, it sounded slightly surprised. Well, those lights are not really stars, they are actually remnant conflagrations of the divine flame. Sunny thought about what he just heard, then tilted his head to the side. Divine flame? What? Why would divine flame burn in the depths of the sky below? The voice chuckled. Then it said with a bit of amusement, how do you think the sky below came to be? A long time ago, this was a beautiful and prosperous land, you know. The amusement drained from its voice, replaced with something much darker. But then, its prideful ruler provoked the wrath of the Lord of Light. The Lord Ah, you probably only know him as Sun God, brought down his heavenly flame upon the lands, shattering the earth and burying an unquenchable fire beneath it. The void grew silent, and then sighed. Over the ages that fire devoured everything, the earth, the land, even reality itself. All that is left is this empty abyss, and the remnant fragments of the divine flame still burning deep below. So, I am sorry to say this, but unless you know a way to survive the searing heat of the all-destroying heavenly fire, you will probably burn to death in a few weeks. Chapter 437. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Sunny sat silently for a few moments thinking, Sun God. So, the ruler of this land had angered the gods, and one of them struck down their kingdom. He could just imagine it. A vast pillar of incandescent white flame falling from the skies, piercing the ground and causing the whole region to fracture, its fragments falling into the searing inferno of the divine flame one after another. Well, not all of them had fallen. He glanced up, wondering if the chained isles were created to save the citizens of the destroyed kingdom from annihilation. If so, that prideful ruler must have been not so simple himself. Who would be powerful enough to dare resist the wrath of the gods, and what had that being done to provoke it? But more importantly, how the hell did the voice of the void know so much about it? A subtly suspicious expression appeared on his face. Really? This is very interesting. And how exactly do you know all this? Sunny hesitated, and then cautiously added, Did you perhaps have something to do with that prideful ruler? The voice was silent for a moment, and then suddenly exploded with sincere laughter. Oh my. I wish. Wouldn't that be grand? But no, I am just an awakened who had studied the chained isles, probably the same way that you have studied them in your travels. The ruins here are all but destroyed by the endless cycle of the crushing, but if one knows where to look, there are still some answers left to find. Sunny smiled. True, but I am actually a research assistant for the Wilderness Survival faculty of the Academy, and yet I have never seen any of the information you possess in the database. With the level of access that I have, that is very strange, isn't it? The voice chuckled. How am I supposed to report my findings to the Academy? I can't even leave the dream realm. Sunny blinked. That actually made a lot of sense. Sort of lost or not. An awakened still had to survive somehow in the dream realm. So they were bound to live in one of the citadels, probably. So it wasn't like they had no contact at all with the real world, even if it was only through the other inhabitants of their citadel. Unless the owner of the voice was not a usual lost, or was lying to Sunny, or was just a figment of his imagination. He frowned. By the way, where are you exactly? I haven't heard a voice like yours anywhere in the sanctuary, and I have spoken to most of the awakened there at least once. The voice lingered for a while, then answered, I am not in the sanctuary. What was that supposed to mean? There was another citadel on the chained isles, the Night Temple, but only those serving valor were allowed to anchor there. Well, excluding Cassie and her cohort. Did the owner of the voice have something to do with the great clan Valor? Sunny raised an eyebrow. Are you from the Night Temple then? But there was no response. It seemed that the mysterious young man Sunny had been speaking with, if he was even real, had once again reached his limit, thus ending their conversation. Sunny sighed. I swear to gods, this is even more annoying than when Effie leaves me on red. Who knew that a voice of the void could be more irritating than someone who had been almost literally raised by wild wolves? No manners, no decorum. Soon Sunny regretted not asking the voice necessary questions. He would have to be more strategic with his words in the future. Survive heavenly fire. Survive heavenly fire. Sunny glanced at the stars and felt that they had drawn even closer. How was he supposed to withstand the searing heat of the divine flame? Could that flame burn shadows? He didn't really have an answer, but felt that it would be at least damaging to him, even in his shadow form. And then, there was a more looming problem. The voice said that it would take Sunny a few weeks to reach the layer of the abyss containing the false stars, which meant that he was going to be very, very hungry by the time he did. Humans could survive a surprising amount of time without any food, but it would take a heavy toll on his body. Sunny had no idea what he was going to find on the other end of the golden string of fate, but doubted that it would be a warm welcome. He had to be ready to confront danger, and becoming starved and weak was not really an option. Sunny lingered for a while, then stared down at the lid of the treasure chest. Was he really going to have to eat that? Even his shadows seemed disgusted by the idea. But hey, food was food, right? With a sigh, Sunny summoned the covetous coffer, took his last meal out, and looked at it with regret. Tonight we feast, tomorrow we mourn, and barf, probably. A few days later, the stars were visibly brighter than they had been before. The sight of the black void littered with shimmering lights would have been beautiful if not for the terrible danger they represented. Sunny was sitting in the center of the plummeting treasure chest with an extremely miserable expression on his face. It was deathly pale, and his chin was covered with drying black blood. Raising a piece of raw devil meat to his mouth, he tore a piece of it with his teeth and forced himself to chew. Disgusting, this is so disgusting. Who knew I would miss the taste of synth paste one day? Maybe I should just starve after all. As soon as he thought that, the void suddenly spoke again. Oh gods, you are actually eating that. Sunny stared into the darkness with hatred, swallowed the piece of mimic meat, and said evenly, "Sure, want a bite?" The voice hesitated for several seconds, then asked, "You're eating it raw?" Sunny gritted his teeth. "Of course I am eating it raw, you fool. How else am I supposed to eat it? I don't exactly have a kitchen here." Then, with a furious determination, he tore another piece of meat and chewed on it. As it turned out, his face had not reached its maximum paleness before. Now, it seemed not only white, but also a little green. The void sighed. Then, it asked curiously, "Are you not afraid of poisoning yourself?" Sunny snarled, "I have a strong stomach." He had indeed considered the possibility of catching a severe case of food poisoning from eating the corrupted meat of the vile devil. As an awakened, however, his digestive system was much stronger than that of mundane humans, and on top of that, there was blood weave. So, he judged that his chances of dying from eating the mimic were rather low. No matter how poetic it would have been, choking to death on the flesh of a devil you killed would be too. How funny. Sunny swallowed the disgusting meat and took a sip from the endless spring. A few moments later, the voice asked, "Have you thought of a way to survive the divine flames?" He stared at his broken arm, then shrugged. "I considered a few." The voice seemed to be pleased to hear that. "Good. I have thought about it as well." Chapter 438, Prince of Nothing. Sunny stared into the void suspiciously. "Yeah. And how come you are so concerned about my well-being?" The voice remained silent for a bit, then answered wistfully, "I haven't really spoken to anyone in a long, long time. It would be a shame to finally find someone to talk to, only for them to die soon, don't you think? That guy is definitely not just a simple lost. What is his deal, really? Is he actually a human or only pretends to be one?" Sunny thought for a bit, then said, "I guess. And since we're on the topic, how is it exactly that we are able to talk?" He expected the voice to change the subject or ignore the question, but to his surprise, it actually answered, "I am not really sure. This has never happened to me before either." After a while, it added hesitantly, Have you perhaps found a piece of a broken mirror somewhere?" Something clicked in Sunny's mind. Broken mirror, mirror beast, beastie. The ascended reflection. The shard of a mirror that the strange creature had left behind was still inside the covetous coffer, smeared with his blood. Crap. So the owner of the voice was the creator of the murderous reflection Sunny had encountered on the reckoning. That gave him as many questions as it had given him answers. He couldn't really think about it right now, though, because the pressure of the flaw was already building in his mind, forcing him to speak. "Now that you mention it, I did indeed recently find a piece of a broken mirror, with the word beastie written on it in a child's handwriting." The voice remained silent for a while, then asked quietly, "Oh, how exactly did you find it?" Sunny did not answer for as long as he could, then reluctantly spoke. "That mirror shard was left behind by a powerful creature I killed. I took it with me, thinking that it might turn out to be important. This time the voice was quiet for an especially long amount of time. When it finally spoke, there was a hint of anguish in it. The owner of the voice tried very hard to suppress it, but his pain seemed to be too deep to not seep into his words even slightly. "So it's dead. I see." Then, it fell silent once again. Sonny tensed. After a while, he asked carefully, You're not going to be angry with me for killing your pet, are you?" A deep sigh resounded from the void. "Angry with you? Why would I be angry with you? You are not to blame for what happened to us." Sonny shivered, suspecting that whoever or whatever it was that had been responsible for the mirror beast becoming separated from its creator and eventually dying by his hand was extremely lucky that the owner of the voice had become one of the lost. Then, he asked cautiously, What exactly was it, though? I have never seen a creature like that." The voice seemed more in control of itself when it answered after a few long moments. "A manifestation of my aspect ability. A kind of an echo, you can say. I created him when I was just a lonely kid. We were together for a long time before we weren't anymore." Sonny tilted his head, then frowned slightly. "What do you mean? A kid? A kid with an aspect ability?" The voice laughed bitterly. That I had my first nightmare when I was 12. It's rare, but does happen sometimes. Few children survive the trial, though." Sonny blinked. Being sent into the nightmare at 12, of course, very few survive. He did know that. In extremely rare cases, the people infected by the spell were outside of the usual age range. The entire first generation of the Awakened had been, for example, and there were cases of this anomaly to this day, even though it usually happened to someone older than the norm, not someone younger. "And I thought that I was unlucky." He cleared his throat, then said awkwardly, "Well, I am sorry for your loss. If it makes you feel any better, the creature tried to say something before it died. We never stopped searching." Something like that. The voice, however, didn't respond. It seemed that its owner had once again spent all of his soul essence, or whatever it was that allowed him to communicate with Sonny, and was now gone for another few days. Sonny sighed. "Curse it. I didn't even have time to ask him how to survive the damned stars." More strategic with how he chose his words, damn it. Sonny spent a few more days plummeting into the void. By now he was having trouble remembering what it even felt like to not be falling. The darkness seemed to be eternal and ever-present, as though he had always been here, in its empty embrace, and all of his actual life was just a strange dream. Maybe it was? No, it wasn't. He was almost sure. By the time the voice returned, the void had changed slightly. Not only were the distant shimmering lights now closer and brighter, but it also felt as if the air was getting warmer. Sonny was in his usual spot, sitting cross-legged in the center of the treasure chest and training to better control the flow of shadow essence. On the surface of the lid near him was a dark longbow and a quiver of black arrows. "You practice archery?" Sonny opened his eyes and glanced into the darkness, then shrugged. "Not really, but I hope to learn a bit of it soon." He made a grimace and nodded toward his broken arm. "I do need 2 functioning hands before I'll be able to, though." The bow and the quiver of arrows were the same he had entrusted to Saint before. Both of the memories were ascended, but only of the first tier. The bow's enchantments made it incredibly strong and sturdy, while the only enchantment that the arrows possessed was that they came as a whole quiver instead of a single one. His broken arm, meanwhile, was healing. He could already move his fingers, but the process was far from over. He was halfway there, though. Sonny healed much faster than mundane humans, and even other Awakened. He was sure that in another week or so, he would be able to take off the splint and draw the black bow. The voice lingered, then said, "We had no time to discuss the divine flames last time." Sonny nodded. "Indeed." Then, he remembered something and asked, "Oh, by the way, what do I call you? Do you have a name? It's a bit awkward to keep thinking of you simply as the voice." The voice laughed. "A name?" "I used to have a name, I guess." Sonny sighed. "Yeah, well, what is it?" The void lingered for a while, then answered with amusement. "Mordred, or rather, Prince Mordred, I guess. Sunny opened and closed his mouth a couple of times, then asked with suspicion in his voice, Prince, what are you the prince of? Mordred laughed. Nothing. I am a prince of nothing. Nothing at all. Chapter 439. Do or Die. Sunny stared into the darkness with an incredulous expression, then shrugged. Sure, whatever. Nice to make your acquaintance, Your Highness. I'm called Sunless, by the way. Sadly, no title. Silently, though, he thought, the young prince that the Dreamspawn had taken away? Oblivious to his suspicions, Mordred hesitated, then asked politely, Sunless, what an unusual name. Sunny grimaced. Yes. My mother had on second thought. Forget that. Are you going to tell me about the divine flame or not? The Prince of Nothing was silent for a bit, then said, There is not much to tell. The heat of those flames is absolutely deadly. Unless you have some way to fly, you are in big trouble, which I assume you don't, otherwise you wouldn't be in this predicament to begin with, right? Well, you can't argue with sound logic, I guess. Sunny sighed. I can control the direction of the fall, but yes, no true flight. He hesitated, then added reluctantly, For what it is worth, my aspect ability allows me to turn incorporeal, as well as teleport for short distances. He didn't really want to share the details of his powers with the mysterious prince, but currently, there was no other choice. Mordred obviously knew more about the sky below than Sunny, so his advice was vital. The lost prince thought for a few moments, then said, Turning incorporeal will help against being cooked by the heat, but it won't save you from the divine flame itself. However, not everything is lost. Even though you can't fly, you do have some mobility. With some luck, you might be able to dodge the conflagrations. Sunny glanced into the darkness with a resentful expression. That I already figured out myself. Tell me something that I don't know, genius. The void chuckled. Fine. But only because you asked nicely. Then it disappeared. Sunny's face twitched. God damn it, he's gone again. But a second later, Mordred's voice suddenly resounded from the darkness. No, there is still time. I was just thinking. He was quiet for a few moments, then said hesitantly, There is actually a path through the divine flame, an empty rift in the tapestry of stars where none of it remains. If you find it, you might survive. Although it was hard to control his emotions these days, Sunny tried his hardest to suppress the misplaced anger and calm himself down. When he spoke, his voice sounded almost even. Why didn't you tell me sooner? How far am I from this rift then? Mordred sighed. How would I know? It's not like I know where you are. Exactly. More than that, I had never managed to find the rift myself. The sky below is vast and deadly, after all. So, he was exploring this abyss too. Why? What's out there, beyond the fake stars? Sunny tilted his head. He asked cautiously, If you never found it, how do you know that it's there? The void remained silent for some time. After a while, when Mordred spoke again, his voice sounded distant and weak. The tier, it should be somewhere near the tier, I think. With that, Sunny felt that he was alone in the darkness again. This time, the mysterious prince was truly gone. He sat motionlessly for a while, staring into the endless nothingness of the sky below. Near the tier. The string of fate, too, had pointed toward the tier, to somewhere very near its center. If the rift in the annihilating field of the divine flames had anything to do with the golden thread, then Sunny had a much better chance of finding the path through the merciless stars than Mordred had ever had. He had already half found it, really. Looking down, Sunny sighed and closed his eyes again, returning to the endless routine of circulating the shadow essence through his body. Day passed after day. The closer Sunny drew to the obliterating stars, the calmer he became. Now that mortal danger was getting near, his mind had no time and reason to slowly destroy itself. The absolute nothingness of the void that had assaulted it too was much less empty now. Not only was it full of threat, but also of heat and light and shadows. Sunny had dismissed the leather elements of the puppeteer's shroud and undid the bands of its upper garment. Stripped to the waist, he meditated in the darkness, the soul serpent coiling around his pale and lithe body. Because of the rough diet of only eating the poisonous meat of a dead devil, he had practically no fat left. His skin looked a bit feverish and was drawn tautly across his lean muscles, making for a sight that was both splendid and a little disturbing. His broken arm had almost healed, so he removed the splint and spent some time every day doing simple exercises to bring it back to its former strength. He had to be cautious not to overexert it too soon, though. The plan of how to survive the field of stars was slowly forming in his mind. It was bound to be a gamble one way or another. But Sonny was not going to give up without doing everything he could to survive. His confidence was somewhat reinforced by the fact that he had, most likely, discovered the rift that Mordred told him about. Following the direction of the golden string of fate that had been practically burned into his mind, Sonny studied a particular cluster of the stars for an entire week before finally noticing something that looked like a tiny, almost imperceptibly minuscule gap in the vast tapestry of countless shimmering lights. Trusting his judgment, he summoned the dark wing and used it to push the treasure chest toward that particular cluster. Luckily, he was already not too far away from it, most likely because he had been aiming to follow the golden string from the very beginning of his fall. As a few more days went by and the stars grew even larger, Sonny became more or less certain that the tiny gap was, indeed, there. It had grown slightly bigger, too. What he was uncertain about, however, was his ability to reach the rift without being incinerated by the annihilating heat of the divine flame. The field of false stars was vast, and the rift was tiny in comparison. At the speed that he was falling, missing it would be far too easy. But what choice did he have? Do or die? Well, when had it ever been any different? Chapter 440, Merciless Stars. After more than 3 weeks of falling into the sky below, at least Sonny thought that it had been that long, he sighed and stood up, balancing on the dangerously swaying treasure chest. His hair was wet with sweat, and his skin glistened in the piercing white light of approaching stars. By now they did not resemble white dots in the boundless darkness of the abyss. Instead, each was the size of a fist, surrounded by a furious, blinding halo. The heat permeating the void was suffocating. Sonny stared down at the ocean of white flames beneath him. If this was what remained of the inferno of heavenly fire, after thousands of years of burning in an empty void, he shuddered to imagine what it must have looked like right after the hammer of divine punishment had fallen on the ancient land. His gaze was locked on a small, empty space between several radiant stars. The rift. This was his goal. As Sonny stared darkly at the tiny patch of emptiness amid the vast field of flame, the void suddenly spoke. Have you, huh? Is that what a large tattoo you have. Sonny glanced at the darkness, then shrugged. What about it? Mordred lingered for a few moments, as though not sure what to say, then asked with amusement, Sunless, are you sure that you are a research assistant? Sonny grinned. Of course I am. Do you know how many contribution points they give me every month? I scribbled a few words about this and that bought me a house. An entire house. Maybe being a researcher is not as swell as being a prince, but it's still a sweet gig with all due respect, of course. Your Highness. The void laughed. You are such an interesting person. Sonny stared into the void with an incredulous expression. You are a bit of an enigma yourself, are you not? Mordred remained silent for a bit, then asked, Are you ready for what is about to come? Instead of answering, Sonny pointed to the ocean of merciless stars. Look there. When the lost prince spoke, his voice was strangely regretful. I can't really see that well. What is it? Oh, right. Sonny hesitated for a few seconds, then said, I think I found the rift you told me about. Mordred asked with surprise in his voice, Really? You found it? Sonny shrugged. We'll see. You said that it should be somewhere under the tier, right? Since I fell right into the tier, there's a chance that I'm right. The void lingered, then said in a somber tone, What if you're not? Sonny smiled. Then it has been nice knowing you. Anyway, anything else you want to tell me before you go? I doubt that we'll have the opportunity to speak again before I reach the stars. Mordred thought for a few seconds, then said, I might not be able to reach you at all after that. So good luck? Sonny raised an eyebrow. Really? The voice of the void answered after a long pause. Yes, why? He shook his head. Nothing, really. I just thought that you are stuck somewhere out there, beyond the stars. Mordred chuckled. No, I am stuck somewhere else. His voice grew strangely distant. Then, an almost inaudible whisper reached Sunny's ears. I hope survive sunless. Then, the lost prince was gone, leaving Sunny alone in the darkness once again. He sighed. Me too. I hope I'll survive too. After Mordred disappeared, Sunny waited for a bit, and then broke the rule he had set for himself for a second time since starting this expedition. He summoned another memory that should have been tied only to Mongrel. The mantle of the underworld. The intricate onyx armor weaved itself from sparks of darkness and covered him from head to toe. Sunny was not accustomed to wearing its closed helmet, since he was usually using Weaver's mask instead, but it was not uncomfortable. His field of vision, however, became slightly constricted. Hopefully no one will be able to see me this far into the abyss. Out here in the sky below, he felt as though no one, not even those who were attuned to revelations, could peer into his secrets and glean anything about them. The only exception to the rule was the Prince of Nothing himself, but he was gone now. The mantle possessed two enchantments that would most likely prove themselves to be extremely helpful soon. The stalwart trait of the armor imbued it with high resistance against various types of elemental damage, including fire. Just seconds after donning it, Sunny felt the suffocating heat retreat, replaced by a pleasant coolness. How long would that coolness last? He did not know. The Living Stone enchantment, on the other hand, allowed the mantle of the underworld to repair itself while being worn. This trait would come into play later, helping Sunny protect himself even after the divine flame became intense enough to damage the onyx armor. After that, Sunny summoned the dark longbow and the quiver of black arrows. By now his hand had recovered enough for him to be able to draw the mighty bow. He just hoped that he would not need to. Finally, he summoned the cruel sight and attached it to his belt. All preparations were now done. Looking down through the narrow slit of the visor, Sunny sighed. Now everything depended on his resilience, luck, and how deep his reserves of shadow essence were. In the stark darkness of the empty void, deeper than even the memories of a blue sky could reach, a cracked treasure chest was plummeting toward an ocean of searing white flames. Its underside was bathed in the furious light, while its lid was drowning in the deepest of shadows. Wisps of smoke were slowly rising from its smoldering wood, and the strips of iron reinforcing it were slowly starting to glow as they turned orange. Sunny, who had become a shadow and was once again hiding on the lid of the dead devil, felt fine for now. Until the treasure chest was destroyed, he was protected from directly touching the light of the divine flame. But how long would the corpse of the mimic last? He was thinking about something else, though something far more dreadful. The rift, the damned rift. I'm going to miss it. Chapter 441, Ocean of Flame. Sunny almost managed to direct his endless fall toward the tiny gap between the remnant conflagrations of the divine flame, but on that incredible scale, even the smallest mistake was bound to take him many kilometers away from the goal. A mistake that he had inevitably made, since there were no lessons on navigating eternal voids, especially without any tools except for his own two eyes. Damn it! Right below him, swiftly approaching, was an ocean of obliterating light, heat, and fire. The conflagrations themselves were rather small, no larger than a dozen meters in diameter, and chaotically scattered in the void at a considerable distance from one another. Each looked like a furious, undulant orb of dancing white flames. The space between them, though, was not safe. It was permeated by immolating heat that nothing could withstand, at least nothing Sunny had at his disposal. As the adamantine wood of the treasure chest started to slowly catch fire, he hesitated, then glanced at the empty darkness of the distant rift in the ocean of light. Whether by accident or by design, there was a point in the field of false stars where no conflagrations remained. A roughly circular breach was torn through them, promising him safe passage. But how was he supposed to reach it? If Sunny jumped off the plummeting chest right now, he would probably be able to glide all the way to the rift. The distance was just right. However, he was pretty sure that the dark wing would be instantly turned to ash by the terrible heat of the remnant vestiges of the divine flame. Not to mention that he himself would probably get thoroughly cooked inside the mantle of the underworld if he remained corporeal for that long. With a mental sigh, Sunny left the comforting embrace of the shadows. A kneeling figure in an intricate onyx armor appeared on the lid of the smoldering treasure chest. Arg! Despite the protection of the stalwart enchantment, the air he breathed in was thin and scoldingly hot. It almost felt as if he was inhaling fire. Other than that, however, the mantle of the underworld did a good job of keeping the heat at bay, and yet Sunny could feel it starting to slowly get warmer. He didn't have a lot of time. Standing up, he raised the dark longbow, knocked an arrow on its string, and gritted his teeth. Then, sending a thin trickle of essence into the muscles of his shoulder and back, he strained his body and drew the mighty bow. It felt as though he was lifting a mountain. How the hell does Saint make it look easy? Feeling his muscles tremble, Sunny aimed toward the rift and hesitated for a second. After he did this, there would be no going back. What is there to go back to, fool? Aren't you sick of that damned chest? Relaxing his hand, he let go of the string. The black arrow shot into the darkness with incredible speed, instantly becoming illuminated by a blinding radiance. It was strange. The void was full of light now, but with nothing to reflect it, the sky below still appeared black and empty. Only when something entered the emptiness did the light become visible. Sunny felt the chest sway and struggled to keep his balance. A couple of moments later, the fletching of the arrow suddenly caught fire and burned away. However, that didn't affect its flight too much. The arrow pierced the darkness and turned into a distant spark, covering almost an entire kilometer in just a few seconds. Then, however, it slowed down considerably, and its wooden shaft began to smolder. It was time to move. As Sunny felt flame licking his greaves, he held his breath and used Shadow Step. The arrow he had sent flying in the direction of the rift was wrapped into one of his shadows. As the shadow unfurled itself from the igniting shaft, Sunny shot out of it as if launched from a giant slingshot. As soon as he left the shadow, it instantly wrapped itself around his body and then slid toward the quiver. Scrap. Sunny found himself flying through the darkness with nothing to support or shield him from being directly exposed to the immolating radiance. The mantle of the underworld suddenly shone in the torrent of light, instantly growing considerably warmer. It wasn't burning his skin yet, but he suspected that there was not much time left before that happened. Especially because his momentum was not only horizontal, but also vertical, and was becoming more so with each moment. He was still plummeting toward the ocean of flames, approaching it with terrifying speed. The closer he got, the more obliterating the heat would become. Twisting as he fell to orient himself in the void, Sunny knocked another arrow and drew the bow again. This time it was considerably harder, since he had nothing to stand on and had to rely solely on the strength of his arms and shoulders. Just in the few seconds it had taken him to draw the bow, the heat became much more destructive. Another arrow flew into the darkness, and several seconds later, he used Shadow Step again, appearing almost 2 kilometers closer to the rift. It was still decently far away, though. Curses. Sunny flew through the obliterating darkness and struggled to knock another arrow. The glossy black surface of the mantle of the underworld was starting to glow, slowly turning incandescent. He was still fine inside, though, for now, if a little hot. Another arrow disappeared into the darkness, and Sunny jumped through the shadows again. This time the jump devoured pretty much all of his remaining shadow essence. Whatever little there was left would not have been enough to repeat the process the 4th time. However, maybe, just maybe, he wasn't going to have to. After using Shadow Step 3 times in a row and turning some of his vertical momentum into horizontal one with each jump, Sunny was now plummeting diagonally through the void, seemingly toward the very edge of the rift. I am going to make it. Am I going to make it? Even if he would, it was going to be very, very close. The string of the bow suddenly caught fire and broke with a loud ring. Dismissing the bow and the quiver, Sunny sent both of his shadows to reinforce the mantle of the underworld and threw his hands and legs to the sides. He was trying to create as much surface area as possible to utilize the resistance of the air in his favor. He was well versed in all kinds of falling and gliding thanks to using the dark wing so often, so this was not something new to him. Granted, he had never done it in a heavy armor. Speaking of which, Sunny hesitated, then directed some of his remaining essence into the mantle of the underworld to activate the Feather of Truth enchantment and make the armor as light as possible. Then all he could do was endure the growing heat and wait and watch as both the obliterating ocean of flames and the circle of saving darkness approached him at tremendous speed. His life now depended solely on which of the two was going to swallow him first. Chapter 442, Burning Heaven. Surrounded by a radiant halo, Sunny plummeted into the darkness. His breath was ragged and hoarse, and his eyes were blinded by the piercing shine of the immolating ocean of white flames beneath him. Fearing that his eyes would be permanently blinded by it, he closed them, which helped a little. Hot. It's so hot. He was drawing closer and closer to the remains of the divine inferno, and as he did, the stone-like metal of the mantle of the underworld was growing hotter and hotter. Soon, its outer layer turned bright red. Then, it started to melt. Damn! Sunny directed more of his remaining essence through the coils of the soul serpent, activating the living stone enchantment of the underworld armor. As the onyx melted and cracked, causing him excruciating pain, the mantle began to repair itself. Before anything could fully breach the surface of the incandescent onyx, the damage was undone. For now, the enchanted armor could heal itself faster than it was being destroyed, in large part due to being augmented by both of his shadows, perhaps. Sunny encountered another problem, though. It was getting harder and harder to breathe, not even because the air was scalding and hot, but because there was not enough of it. Fire fed on oxygen, after all. Luckily, Sunny was no stranger to being deprived of it. What's more, thanks to the blood weave, he could get by without breathing for much longer than most awakened, and he suspected that he would have to do just that very soon. Hopefully, he would be able to reach the rift shortly after that. And speaking of the rift, he carefully opened his eyes a little and glanced into the blinding inferno beneath, trying to judge whether or not he was going to make it. For now it seemed that he would easily pass the field of fire and enter the dark emptiness, but that was just an illusion. Sunny had to factor in that his forward momentum was constantly growing weaker, which meant that his trajectory would become more and more vertical the longer he fell through the searing abyss. It was too hard to tell whether or not he was going to make it. Gritting his teeth, he shifted his weight and lowered one hand, grabbing the hilt of the cruel sight. Then he raised the silver blade to his chest, threw a cursory glance at his warped reflection, and activated the Light Eater enchantment of the somber sword. Instantly, the mirror blade began to absorb the merciless light of the false stars, growing white-hot and incandescent. Sunny, however, found himself able to see once again. He even felt a little cooler, although it might have been just wishful thinking. Surrounded by a strange bubble of darkness left behind by the devoured light, Sunny plummeted toward the obliterating stars. Almost. I'm almost there. By then, the conflagrations of the divine flame were so close that it seemed as though he could reach out and touch them. No matter how hard Sunny tried, he couldn't draw in even a little bit of air into his lungs. The rift was so close, but in the end, it turned out to be just a little bit too far. Sunny reached the very edge of the field of flames. He only had to fly past one last cluster of conflagrations. However, his fall took him straight into the embrace of fire instead. Sunny would have screamed if there was any air in his lungs. Moving at a terrible speed, he pierced right through one of the seething orbs and emerged from the other side of it, wreathed in white flame. A terrible pain enveloped his whole being. But it wasn't physical pain. It was the similar kind of pain he had experienced while using the broken oath, only magnified 100-fold. Shadows, my shadows. His shadows were wrapped around the mantle of the underworld, and so they had been badly damaged by the divine fire. The armor itself had caught aflame and was now quickly disintegrating. The fire was spreading too, threatening to envelop him whole. Half blind from pain, Sunny did the only thing that could save him now. He dismissed the onyx armor. The mantle of the underworld fell into countless sparks of darkness, which then disappeared, causing the fire to be extinguished. Naked and hurting, Sunny fell into the darkness and saw the cruel sight crack. the silver of its blade becoming dull and tarnished. Following an instinct, he activated the dark mirror enchantment, and then dismissed that memory too. Finally, he wrapped the wounded shadows around himself and circulated what little shadow essence he had left through his entire body, spending all of it to make himself more resilient. And then, he felt cool wind touch his blistering skin. Sunny fought through the terrible pain and opened his eyes. Behind him, there was a wall of ruthless radiance. But in front of him, there was nothing but darkness. He had reached the rift. Hurts, everything hurts. Crap, this is so unfair. Sunny flew deeper into the rift, creating more distance between himself and the conflagrations of the divine flame. Of course, they were too close for him to feel comfortable, but at least he could breathe again, and wasn't being cooked alive. Well, at least not very fast. Before being badly hurt by the divine flame, Sunny had hoped that somehow, miraculously, he would turn out to be immune to it. He was technically a shadow of a sun god's descendant, after all. Why wouldn't he be immune to the manifestation of his master's domain? Well, his master's indirect ancestor's domain, to be precise. Plus, he was not just any shadow, but a divine one left behind by Shadow God himself. Light and shadows were two sides of the same coin, weren't they? As it turned out, the divine flame didn't care. Arg! Currently, Sunny was falling through the rift. He had reached its center and dove straight down, hoping to stay as far away from the surrounding stars as possible. It was as though there was a tunnel of empty darkness torn through the very heart of the field of flames, and he was following it down. Down, down, down. It was hard to even conceive of a world where he wasn't constantly falling down. Now that he had no mantle of the underworld to protect him from the blaze, Sunny was suffering a lot. Rift or not, the air was still permeated by the unbearable heat. His skin was red, with patches of it blistering. Some of it was badly burned by his unfortunate clash with the divine flame, and because he had not dismissed the burning mantle of the underworld fast enough. It was not life-threatening, though. Yet, come on, end, goddammit. But the field of flames showed no signs of ever ending. Until it did. After a while, when Sunny was on the verge of losing conscience from the constant heat, he noticed that the scattering of the immolating stars around him became a bit thinner. And then, even more so. And then suddenly and without any warning, he fell out of the field of divine flame and found himself surrounded by nothing but blessed nothing once again. The radiant inferno was now above him, growing further away with each second. It looked as if heaven was on fire. And beneath him, Sunny looked down and shivered. What? How? His eyes widened in shock. Chapter 443, Secrets of the Void. Out there in the empty darkness of the void, something even darker loomed, hidden from the radiant light of the ocean of flame above. Sunny peered at the distant black silhouette and shivered. What the hell? What is it doing here? Far below him, a small island cut from dark stone floated in the endless emptiness, surrounded by drifting slabs of shattered obsidian. A tall and magnificent pagoda stood in its center, built of a flawlessly black material that was neither wood nor stone. Its lusterless walls seemed to devour any light that touched them. It was the perfect replica of the ivory tower. But at the same time, its opposite. The two pagodas were so alike that for a moment, Sunny even thought that he had somehow found himself high up in the sky above. But no. The island that the obsidian tower stood upon was different. It was larger than the one every awakened on the chained isles was used to observing in the skies, and had no broken chains hanging from its stone slopes. On its desolate surface, remains of mysterious structures could be seen, turned to ruin by the passage of time. Several obsidian pillars protruded horizontally from its edges, stretching into the empty void like strange wharves. From high above, Sunny couldn't see much of the island in detail. But he was approaching it fast. Crap, too fast. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then suppressed the desire to immediately summon the dark wing. The divine flames were still too close, and their heat could damage the fragile memory. He had to wait for a bit. There was still time. Even if it was going to run out pretty soon, Sunny continued to fall, waiting. With every minute, the heat of the immolating stars dissipated a little, and with each minute, the dark island grew closer and closer. Finally, knowing that there was no more time to waste, Sunny summoned the dark wing and commanded it to turn his fall into a glide. The dragonfly cloak turned into a blur behind his back, but it also began to produce thin wisps of smoke, threatening to catch a flame at any moment. Curses, supported by the enchantment of the dark wing, Sunny's descent started to slow down little by little. His speed, however, was too great to be nullified in a single instant. It was dropping swiftly, but was it swift enough to prevent him from splattering all over the surface of the mysterious island? And was the transparent cloak even going to endure for long enough? Sunny cursed and trembled as he watched the obsidian tower approach. Here goes nothing. Damn. In the end, he still landed with enough speed to potentially shatter all bones in his legs from the impact against the ground. At the last moment, however, Sunny turned into a shadow and dove into the deep darkness enveloping the island instead. Safely embraced by the shadows, he submerged himself into them, and finally allowed his mind to relax. Safe, I'm safe. He was finally safe. For a few seconds at least, Sunny was in a world of pain. His shadow essence was running out, too. Also, he had no idea what terrifying danger was waiting for him on the mysterious island that remained hidden in the deepest reaches of the sky below for thousands of years, nor what deadly secrets waited for him inside the obsidian tower. But for now, he did not care. All he cared about was that he was not falling anymore. Bliss, this is pure bliss. Floating in the dark embrace of shadows, Sunny couldn't get enough of the fact that, for the first time in almost a month, he was stationary. He finally had solid ground under his feet again, metaphorically speaking, of course. In any case, it was such a beautiful feeling. Sunny allowed himself to relax and rested for a bit, safely hidden in the deep, dark shadows. After a while, he sighed and forced himself to turn his attention to the outside world. Moving closer to the surface of the deep darkness that embraced him, Sunny cautiously took a look outside. Strangely, what met him was complete and utter silence. There were no nightmare creatures on the island, no abyssal horrors, no terrifying beings to devour him whole. Not even a single unholy titan slumbered nearby, ready to wake up at the slightest disturbance. The island seemed empty, which was very fortunate, considering that Sunny was running very low on shadow essence and was going to have to assume his physical form soon. He hesitated for a few moments, then took stock of his equipment and himself. His soul was seriously wounded, but not beyond its ability to heal itself in time. His body was not exactly whole, but in somewhat of a splendid shape, considering all that had happened. He even had all his limbs intact. Both the mantle of the underworld and the cruel sight, as well as the dark wing and saint's bow, were heavily damaged. Luckily, none of these memories were completely destroyed. It was going to take a long time before he could use them again, though. Days, maybe even weeks. On the bright side, Saint herself had recovered from the wounds received on the shipwreck island ages ago. Sunny actually could have summoned her at any point during his journey through the sky below, but there was no real reason to. Plus, the treasure chest would not have accommodated both of them, especially considering how much the living statue weighed. The dark mirror enchantment of the cruel sight now also had 2 elemental augmentations for Sunny to choose from. Its runes showed: current charge, divine flame; latent charges, soul. Divine flame, huh? Well, if there was one benefit from being burned by the damn thing, it was that now he would be able to cause similar pain to others. So it was totally worth it in the end, no doubt about it. I guess we will have to see. And lastly, Sunny was now completely sure that the thing on the other end of the golden string of fate was the obsidian tower. His intuition was calm and silent, that told him that he had arrived at his destination. Somewhere inside, a thing that was deeply connected to his fate waited. Glancing at the magnificent silhouette of the black pagoda, Sunny sighed and left the safety of the shadows, emerging from them to step onto the surface of the island that no other human had visited in thousands of years, if ever. Chapter 444, Obsidian Tower. Sunny stood naked on the rocky surface of the dark island. He grimaced and looked at his body, which was a map of burns, some more severe than others, then summoned the puppeteer's shroud. Not wishing for the soft fabric to touch the worst of his wounds, he left it the way it had been during the latter stages of his journey through the sky below, with the leather elements gone and the upper garment undone and tied around his waist. This time his body was wrapped in shadows and appeared black, as if cut from the same obsidian that the dark island consisted of. The coils of the soul serpent seemed to shimmer as the essence flowed through them. A moment later, Saint stepped from behind him and moved forward, summoning the midnight shard as she walked. Knowing how badly his soul was damaged, Sunny decided to keep the broken oath locked away for a while, so the shadow was not surrounded by the destructive aura anymore. He was also not in any shape to fight himself, at least not very effectively, and that was why the austere Tachi was currently in the hands of the taciturn demon. If push came to shove, Sunny would either use the moonlight shard or command the soul serpent to assume the Odachi form. With a heavy sigh, he summoned the endless spring and greedily drank the cold water from it, then leaned forward and poured some on his head. After that, he finally felt like a human once again. All in all, things weren't that bad. He was alive and in one piece, suffering from neither thirst nor hunger. Here on the dark island, the air was pleasantly warm. Bright stars burned in the empty void high above, making for a beautiful view. Right in front of them, the graceful silhouette of the obsidian tower rose from the ground like a black rift in reality. It turned out to be much larger than Sunny had thought, but nowhere near the scale of the Crimson Spire. That cursed thing seemed to be too gargantuan to even exist, while the ancient pagoda was more or less fit to have been built for humans. Well, maybe for extremely tall humans, or tiny giants. As Sunny studied the obsidian tower, Saint tilted her head and stared at the black pagoda too, her ruby eyes reflecting some strange emotion. Was it recognition? Why would his shadow recognize a tower hidden in the depths of the abyss below the chained islands? Strange. Sunny frowned, then dismissed the endless spring. He remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly headed toward the tall pagoda. Saint followed. As they walked across the island, Sunny had time to look at the various ruins left on its surface. It was hard to determine what they had been once, but Sunny got the feeling that he wasn't looking at the remains of buildings, more like structures, devices. Their purpose was now impossible to determine, but whatever it had been, he doubted that anyone could have ever lived inside. The closest he could get to putting his feeling in words was that these ruins reminded him most of the bowels of the underground factory his mom had worked in when he was little. Even though the factory was much larger and built of alloy instead of cut blocks of obsidian, not to mention being much more advanced, the sensation was the same. Just what was the purpose of this island? Who lived here? Who built that strange tower? The closer Sunny got to the obsidian tower, the more he was impressed by its graceful beauty. Even though the pagoda was hidden in the depths of the sky below, where very few creatures would have ever seen it, the unknown builder spent time to ensure that it replicated the magnificence of its ivory counterpart perfectly. It would have been breathtaking if it wasn't so menacing. Surrounded by nothing but emptiness and silence, the obsidian tower appeared ominous, just by virtue of existing. I am not scared at all. He was, however, thinking about one thing in particular. Which tower was really the replica, and which one was the original? The beautiful white pagoda that flowed high above the chained aisles, or the menacing black one that hid in the darkness below? Maybe he was going to find out. Soon, Sunny and Saint approached the tall gates of the obsidian tower. Nothing attacked them, and no frightening sound came from inside, announcing that something that dwelled beyond the black gates was awakening in hunger. The pagoda was silent, just like the rest of the dark island. The strange thing, though, was that Sunny could not feel any shadows on the other side of the massive door. Not because there weren't any, but because the walls of the tower seemed to shield the interior from his shadow sense. A cold shiver ran down his spine. I have never encountered anything like this before, have I? He hesitated, then approached the black door, summoned the moonlight shard, and scratched its surface. A layer of black dust fell down, revealing a much harder, and even blacker surface beneath. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Soot? The entire pagoda was covered in a thick layer of soot. He stood motionlessly for a bit, trying to understand what meaning was there in this fact, then simply shrugged and studied the ancient gate. The problem he was facing was that the gate didn't have a handle to open. Neither did it have a keyhole, a bell to ring, or a knocker to announce his arrival. How the hell am I supposed to open it? Without shadow sense, he couldn't use shadow step to simply appear inside. So for the moment, Sonny was stuck. It would be very, very funny to travel all this way, only to find out that I can't open a damn door, right? Slightly embarrassed, he looked at Saint and asked, "Any ideas?" He didn't really expect an answer from the taciturn demon, but to his surprise, the shadow stared at him for a few moments, and then lowered her sword. Then, she raised one hand and pointed to her eye. Sonny observed all of that in complete bewilderment, then blinked a couple of times. Eye? What does she mean? Then, an idea came into his mind. Turning back to the door, he put one hand on it, and then shifted his gaze in a similar manner he did when looking beneath the surface of memories to look at their spellweave. And there, beneath the obsidian surface of the tower's gate, he saw it. A weave. It wasn't the weave of ethereal threads he was used to seeing, though. Instead, it was a much cruder and more primitive version of it, created from very physical diamond strings that stretched beneath the stone surface, creating a beautiful but simple pattern. Sonny had only seen this type of weave one time before, inside Saint herself. Back when she was just an echo, he had noticed it hidden behind the radiant pattern of the spell weave. He had thought that it was what made the stone warriors alive, in the first place, that it was created by the last child of the unknown in the cavernous halls of his dark domain, and that it might have been the precursor of the spell itself, or maybe an imitation of it. Was this tower built by the Lord of the Underworld too, then? Sonny hesitated for a moment, then moved his hand to a particularly bright node of the diamond weave and sent a small amount of shadow essence into it. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the gates of the obsidian tower opened. Chapter 445, Respite. Visible only to Sonny, the diamond weave beneath the surface of the gate ignited with ghostly light. Almost immediately, a thin vertical crack appeared in the ancient stone. Then, the gates silently opened, and a gust of wind hit Sonny in the back. He took a few steps away, hiding behind Saint, and cautiously looked over her shoulder at the dark entrance. Nothing was moving in the darkness. From what he could see, the interior of the obsidian tower seemed quite mundane. As soon as the gate opened, his shadow's sense could finally penetrate the invisible barrier surrounding the graceful pagoda. It didn't detect any danger as well. It really did seem safe. He waited for a few moments, then coughed and waved a hand in front of his face, trying to get the soot that had flown into the air away from it. Well, nothing to worry about then. Let's go. Sonny glanced at Saint, lingered for a second, and added in a polite tone, "Oh, ladies first." The taciturn demon turned her head slightly, stared at him with one ruby eye, then simply walked forward and stepped over the threshold of the ancient tower. Sonny waited for a few moments and followed, tightly gripping the handle of the moonlight shard. He dove into the darkness that reigned behind the tall frame of the entrance, took a dozen steps forward, and found himself in a wide corridor that seemed to encircle the entire first level of the pagoda. The corridor stretched both far to the left and to the right. Here and there, Sonny could see large doors leading to differently sized rooms that were situated in the direction of the tower's outer wall, all the way to the bends of the corridor, and right in front of him was an intricate wooden gate decorated with beautiful engravings. Behind it was the central hall of the tower. Sonny hesitated for a bit, then pushed the wooden gate, which opened easily and revealed a vast chamber on the other side. That smell, his eyes widened. Behind the gate was a large hall with a very tall ceiling. As soon as the gate opened, glass lanterns ignited on its walls, filling the interior of the obsidian tower with ghostly blue light. There were various things in the hall, all of which demanded Sonny's attention. There was a stand holding smith's tools and implements, all masterfully crafted from black obsidian and silver. A badly burned work table with a scattering of beautiful soul crystals on its black surface. A stone wall with mysterious schematics cut into it, the cuts themselves so smooth and deep that he couldn't even begin to imagine what had left them behind, let alone what the schematics described. There were strange devices forged from silver and black steel, some of which reminded him of astronomical instruments, but also very mundane things, like chairs, tables, and even something that resembled a very long bed. All of it was perfectly preserved and immaculate, with not a speck of dust anywhere, cleaner than even his own house in the real world was, despite the thousands of years that must have passed since the obsidian tower was visited last. It also all felt slightly wrong. The sizes of everything were almost fit to be used by a human, but slightly different. The shapes of the handles of all the tools were slightly strange. The way the pieces of furniture and equipment were arranged in space filled him with a slight feeling of unease, even though he didn't know why. But Sonny didn't dwell on this for too long. Neither did his gaze linger on any of these items. His attention was pulled toward one specific place. Not too far from him stood a simple wooden table, and on it was all kinds of delicious food: juicy meat, freshly baked bread, succulent grapes, glass jars of exquisite wine, beautiful pots full of steaming tea. All of it waited for him, as if served only a few seconds ago. Sonny's mouth watered. How is this possible? This has to be an illusion, right? Covered in layers of soot, sweat, and blood, he walked toward the table. His boots left black marks on the pristine floor of the hall. Arriving at his destination, Sonny reached out and grabbed a piece of bread with his dirty hand and greedily devoured it, then took one of the intricate silver goblets and filled it with wine. The rest of the goblets clattered to the floor, thrown off the table by his careless movement. Not paying it any attention, Sonny gulped down the sweet wine and laughed, sending breadcrumbs flying into the air. Ah, this is not bad, really. He would have preferred something without alcohol, but then again, this wine tasted so good. There was a wide grin on Sonny's face, but also dirty traces left by tears. His shoulders trembled. This really hits the spot. He was aware of the fact that the food could have been full of poison, but didn't care too much. He was just too hungry, tired, and spent. His body and his soul both hurt too much. He was at his wit's end. Refilling his goblet and grabbing a piece of perfectly roasted meat, he wandered away from the table and took another look at the large hall. There's no one here, right, Saint? The shadow silently walked behind him, vigilantly looking around and keeping the midnight shard ready. But there was nothing to use it against. Sonny wandered for a minute or so, and eventually stopped near a large bed covered with black, lavish furs. Dropping the empty goblet on the floor, he hesitated a little, and then climbed into the furs. Who's been sleeping in my bed? Sonny dismissed the puppeteer's shroud and lowered his heavy head onto a soft pillow. He wanted to give Saint the command to stand guard, but there was no need. The taciturn demon was already doing exactly that. Before Sonny could think about something else, the exhaustion of the past few weeks took over his mind, and offering almost no resistance, it slipped easily into the embrace of darkness. The first thing Sonny ended up doing after discovering the obsidian tower and finding his way inside was falling on a bed and going to sleep. He slept well. Chapter 446, Relentless Destroyer. Sonny slept for a long time, the exhaustion slowly leaving his battered body. After a while, though, his consciousness rose from the deepest layers of slumber, summoned back by pain and thirst. With a sigh, he turned to his other side and tried to go back to sleep. After a few more hours of tossing and turning, though, Sonny was finally awoken by the loud sound of something crashing to the floor. What is Saint doing? He reluctantly opened his eyes and sat up. As Sonny's weight shifted, the bed beneath him suddenly broke with a loud crack. He rolled onto the floor with a startled yelp. Huh? Standing up, Sonny looked at the broken bed, then at the hall of the obsidian tower, which was now submerged in darkness. A bewildered expression appeared on his face. The room he had entered before had gone through a dramatic transformation while he was asleep. The magical lanterns were now extinguished, and everything inside seemed dilapidated and decrepit, almost on the verge of crumbling to pieces. The magnificent tools and implements had rusted through and deformed. The work table had collapsed under its own weight. That was the sound which had awoken Sonny. The food he had enjoyed yesterday had turned to dust. The pristine condition of the hall was gone, and now it was full of darkness, debris, and dirt. It was as though eons had passed since he fell asleep. A cold feeling appeared in his chest. Have I slept for 1,000 years? Remembering fairy tales where similar things often happened, Sunny felt a hint of horror, but then thought about it for a few moments and calmed down. No, he had not, judging by how much shadow essence had accumulated in his cores. He slept for about 24 hours straight, which was a lot, but nowhere near 1,000 years. Saint, who was keeping watch nearby, also didn't look as if she had been guarding him for a few centuries. Instead, it was the pagoda itself that had aged, as if an invisible seal that had kept it untouched by the passage of time for all those thousands of years was now broken, and time was finally catching up with it. Time was the most relentless destroyer, after all. Sunny sighed with relief, then grimaced. Curses, I should have eaten more yesterday. Much, much more. All that delicious food, wasted. Shaking his head dejectedly, Sunny looked around, then assessed his own state. His wounds were already much better than they had been the day before. The burns were still rather painful, but within his capacity to endure without being slowed down in battle too much. A couple more days of rest, and he would be close to being fully functional again. He was really hungry, though. But that was going to have to wait. Summoning the moonlight shard, Sunny gave Saint a command to follow, and went to explore the obsidian tower. It took Sunny about an hour to fully explore the first level of the ancient pagoda. Some of the doors in the outer corridor had collapsed and turned to dust. Some remained standing and required him to use a tiny bit of shadow essence to unlock them. Behind the doors were all kinds of rooms. Most of them were empty, suggesting that the master of the tower had moved away a long time ago, taking all the valuable things with him, while some contained weathered debris and dust. Sunny spent a lot of time trying to understand what all these things had once been, but the damage done by the accelerated time was too extensive to even guess. Such a shame. Feeling strangely disappointed, Sunny decided that it was time to move on to other levels of the tower. He still had to find the thing that had pulled him toward this place, as well as, hopefully, some means of returning either to the Chained Isles or to the real world. The idea of being stuck on this island forever did not seem very appealing, especially now that there was no food anywhere around. Not finding anything interesting on the first level, Sunny decided to explore further. From the outside, it had seemed as though the obsidian tower had 6 levels, which really surprised Sunny. He had expected there to be 7. However, after finding 2 stairwells, one stair leading up, the other down, he realized that there was an underground level too, which explained this small discrepancy. Everything having to do with the spell and the dream realm had a tendency to be tied to the number 7, except the gods, of whom there had been only 6. I guess that's why they are called gods. No law can bind them. Not even such a weird and random law as all things coming in 7s. Sunny looked up, then looked down, and decided to explore the underground level first. Letting Saint go ahead, he entered the spiraling staircase and descended into the depths of the dark island. Unlike the ground level, the basement of the obsidian tower turned out to be one giant hall, and in it, Sunny recoiled. For a second, it seemed as though hundreds of dismembered corpses were piled at the center of the hall, forming a morbid hill. But as Sunny took a step back and instinctively raised the moonlight shard, he realized that he made a mistake. The bodies piled in the center of the chamber were not that of people. Instead, they were dolls. Hundreds of broken porcelain dolls, each the size of a human, were discarded in the underground hall. Their fragile bodies were shattered and broken, laying there like abandoned toys. Some were missing limbs, some were left with gaping holes in their torsos, some had long ago turned into piles of small fragments, with not even their faces remaining. But those faces that did remain, Sunny tilted his head, then glanced at Saint. Every broken doll had the same face, or rather all of their faces looked alike, as if they were all imperfect copies of the same original. They had the same flawless, inhumanly beautiful features that Saint had. Only the craftsmanship behind the faces of the broken dolls seemed much less refined, as though the sculptor had not yet perfected his skill when creating them. They all looked like Saint's lesser siblings. If Sunny ever had doubts that the obsidian tower had once belonged to a certain underworld demon, now there were none. The last child of the unknown had clearly spent some time here. was probably the one who had created the Black Pagoda in the first place, for some mysterious purpose Sunny couldn't even begin to guess. Then, however, his attention was drawn to something else. The floor of the vast hall was covered by a thick layer of dust, which should not have been disturbed in a few thousand years. But it had been. A set of fleet footprints led all the way from the bottom of the stairs, where Sunny was standing, to the pile of broken dolls, circled it, and then mysteriously disappeared. Sunny stared at it for a few moments, surprised. Someone had entered the obsidian tower before me. Chapter 447, Primal Fear. Sunny stared at the footprints for some more, then frowned. How does this make any sense? The obsidian tower had been sealed before he opened its gates. After he did so, the magic that had preserved everything inside was dispelled, which meant that those doors had not been opened in thousands of years. It wasn't that easy to gain entry into the pagoda to begin with. Not even mentioning the fact that one had to travel through the sky below and find the only rift in the boundless ocean of divine flames. There was also the fact that the gate had to be opened by pouring essence into the weave of diamond strings beneath its surface. Sunny could only see the weave and understand its meaning a little because his eyes had been transformed by the drop of Weaver's blood. He assumed that there were other awakened with similar abilities, but there had to be very, very few of them. And what were the chances that one would find their way to the dark island beyond the immolating sea of stars, which was hidden in the depths of this endless void? And how would they enter the pagoda without causing its seal to break? Just who was it that snuck into the obsidian tower unseen, and when? It had to have happened long before today. Sunny knew for a fact that Saint would not have let anyone come and go without waking him up. Neither would his shadows. Even when he slept, they were aware and vigilant. So it could have happened at any point in the thousands of years since the tower had been abandoned by its rightful owner. For now, he had no answer. Feeling a little apprehensive, Sunny approached the pile of broken dolls and studied them for some time. Saint came closer too and stared at them silently. Then she poked one with the tip of the midnight shard and turned away indifferently, as if losing all interest in the porcelain mannequins. I guess she doesn't care too much about lesser versions of her. Saint had repeatedly shown her disdain toward things that seemed to be replicas of her kind. It had been the same with the Black Knight, and even with the walking colossus of the Forgotten Shore. Sunny clearly remembered how unimpressed his shadow had been with the awesome stone giant. Turning away from the broken dolls, Sunny looked around and noticed that the walls of the chamber were lined with massive glass vessels. Some were whole and some were broken, but all were empty. The glass was black and opaque, covered with a thick layer of soot from the inside. Weird. Not finding anything else of interest on the underground level, he returned to where he had started and rested for a while, drinking water from the endless spring and trying to suppress his hunger. This place is so eerie. It was indeed. The Black Tower stood at the edge of an endless void of darkness, empty and abandoned, with everything inside of it made out of nothing by an inhuman mind. It was not a very welcoming place, at least not for humans. Sunny stared at the ancient walls that surrounded him and wondered about the secrets of the past. After a while, he stood up and cautiously headed for the second level of the Great Pagoda. As soon as Sunny set foot on it, though, he instantly felt that something was very, very wrong there. The feeling of deep, subtle, primordial terror he suddenly experienced was unlike anything he had known before, with the exception, perhaps, of those few moments back on the Forgotten Shore when the walking colossus had lifted the giant three-eyed skull from the depths of the dark sea. But here, this feeling was even more dire, even more invasive. What? What is this? Just like the underground level, this one consisted of only one great hall. The black walls rose high into the darkness, creating a magnificent and solemn atmosphere. At the center of it, cut into the obsidian floor, was a massive silver brazier, and in it, Sunny shuddered and took a step back. Something was growing from the brazier, spreading outward like a vile kind of rot. It had infected the very stone of the ancient tower, turning it into a semblance of repulsive black, pulsating flesh. The silver brazier was infected by the terrifying growth too, its metal somehow becoming a part of it. It seemed as if everything would become absorbed and transformed by the spreading corruption. As long as it was touched by the harrowing growth, entire worlds would be devoured by it, perhaps if given chance. The thing slowly spreading from the ancient brazier felt like pure evil. Sonny shivered, gave Saint a signal to stay back, and shifted his gaze slightly. He was looking past spreading black flesh at the source of this harrowing infection. At the very center of the brazier, blackened by the flames that must have raged in it once, lay a severed human arm. Well, it resembled that of a human, at least. The arm was much longer than it should have been, and the hand had 7 fingers that ended with sharp claws. The rot seemed to be spreading from a terrible torn wound on the forearm, to the charred and emaciated flesh, and then outward, to everything else around it. Despite the repugnant state of the severed arm, the cut that separated it at the shoulder seemed clean and perfectly smooth, as if delivered by a steady and unfaltering blade. But Sonny was more affected by something else. A deep frown appeared on his face when he noticed it. In his mind's eye, the vile arm was radiating a blindingly bright, overwhelming, beautiful golden radiance. It was awash in the light of divinity. A frightening thought appeared in Sonny's head. Can it be? In front of him, stricken by the harrowing rot, was a severed arm of a deity. It was also the reason why fate had brought him to this lost and forgotten corner of the abyss. Chapter 448, Golden Needle. Sonny stared at the severed arm of an unknown deity, then at the harrowing profane rot spreading from it. Then he tiredly rubbed his face. Why can't anything ever be easy? He was sure that his fate was somehow connected to that arm, which meant that he was going to have to get to it somehow. But Sonny was also sure that there weren't enough rewards in all of the universe to make him go anywhere near that rot, let alone touch something infected by it. He had the feeling that this thing was way, way out of his league. In fact, he suspected that a divine being had ruthlessly severed their own arm, because even someone as powerful as that had no means to resist that spreading corruption. What was Sonny supposed to do then? Well, trying to remain as far from the rot as possible, he studied it for a while before coming to a strange conclusion, or rather, a strange question. If the corruption was so terrible, then why had it not spread through the entire tower? Why had it only managed to crawl a few meters out of the silver brazier, turning a small portion of the second level of the pagoda into its flesh? Scratch that. Why didn't the whole island become one giant chunk of rotten black, whatever the hell that thing is? The answer was not hard to guess. It was because the rot, just like everything else inside the tower, had been sealed away from time for thousands of years. And now that Sonny had broken that seal, his frown deepened as he glanced at the silver hearth that was overgrown and had become a part of the spreading rot. Now, there were only 2 possibilities. Time was going to catch up to the devouring corruption, and it was either going to slowly consume everything or starve and die. Could that thing last for thousands of years with nothing to feed on except for cold stone? Did it need to feed on flesh and souls, or would anything do? I guess I'm going to find out. Keeping an eye on the patch of harrowing rot, Sonny tried to suppress his fear and took a step forward. It didn't seem like the rot was spreading, at least not yet. In any case, he wasn't going to get closer to it. But he also knew that if the worst happened, he had no tool at his disposal that would save him. If that thing began to grow, slowly spreading across the whole of the obsidian tower, and then across the whole island, Sonny was simply going to die. Probably jump down into nothingness to avoid becoming a part of that thing. There was nowhere else to retreat to in the sky below, after all, and he doubted that he would be able to find a second secret island out there in the void. So, his only hope was to find something inside the pagoda to save him. He had to explore further. Plus, there was a possibility that the rot would swiftly wither and die, not that Sonny would bet on it. Pressing his back against the cold obsidian, Sonny dismissed Saint and skirted around the outer wall of the great hall until he reached the staircase that led higher, to the 3rd level. There, he summoned the taciturn demon again, hesitated for a bit, and then left one of his shadows to keep an eye on the devouring rot. Feeling irrational panic at the thought of turning his back to the silver brazier, Sonny gritted his teeth and then cautiously ascended the spiraling stairs. As soon as the terrible thing disappeared from view, he let out a relieved sigh and realized that his entire body was covered in a cold sweat, Raising a trembling hand, Sonny wiped his face and then continued to climb higher. Saint, being by his side, gave him a little confidence, at least. The shadow seemed absolutely unperturbed by the horrific visage they had left behind. I bet fear can't even fit into that stone head of hers. Do shadows have the ability to be afraid? He didn't know whether or not Saint could feel fear, but the gloomy shadow certainly could. In fact, behind its haughty exterior, it was rather cowardly. He was sure that the bastard would have been trembling all over if not for the fact that it was currently wrapped around his body. Trying to distract himself with these thoughts, Sonny entered the third level of the obsidian tower and froze, dumbfounded by what he saw there. I see. Wait, no. What the hell am I looking at? The chamber he found himself in was smaller than the previous 3 halls he had explored, mostly because the pagoda narrowed the higher it went, but also because the level was separated into several chambers. And in that chamber in particular, dozens of porcelain's arms floated in the air, each at a different level of being disassembled into tiny parts. It was as though someone had stolen them from the pile of broken dolls in the basement of the obsidian tower and then brought them here to do what, exactly? Sonny stared at the floating garden of disassembled arms and then walked closer. He felt as though he was in some bizarre anatomy museum. As it turns out, the porcelain dolls were much more complex than he had thought. In their disassembled state, their limbs showed how intricate the design was, and how many moving parts went into making each one as functional and articulated as that of a human. The joints in particular seemed like a marvel of engineering, not to mention the incredibly delicate weave of the diamond string beneath. Even Spelltech automatons could not boast of that level of ingenuity and intricacy. But why were these arms brought here and taken apart? Who had done it? The prince of the underworld himself? It didn't look like it. Why would he need to study his abandoned creations? It all became clearer when Sonny reached a stone pedestal standing at the far end of the chamber and saw a faint golden light emanating from a small object laying on it. On the surface of the table were numerous parts that had been scavenged from the disassembled porcelain arms, several skeins of beautiful diamond string, and a long, narrow needle. It was the needle that gave off a faint, weak radiance. Sonny looked at the needle, then glanced at the floating porcelain arms, noting for the first time that each was missing a part or two. Finally, different pieces of information connected in his mind, and he felt that he understood something about what had transpired in the obsidian tower. Sometime after the prince of the underworld had left this hidden island, perhaps years, or perhaps thousands of years, an uninvited guest had snuck into the Black Pagoda like a thief, somehow getting past the closed gates without ever opening them or disturbing the seal that had been preserving this place from being ravaged by time. That thief was a divine creature themselves, and also horribly wounded. One of their arms had been torn open and infected by the spreading rot that no one, not even a deity like them, could expel. That was why the thief had severed their infected arm at the shoulder and tossed it into the divine flame that had been burning in the silver brazier on the second level, and then went down to the basement to collect limbs from the broken porcelain dolls. It was that deity that had circled the pile of them and left the footprints in the dust for Sonny to notice. In the end, the thief ascended to the 3rd floor and fashioned a new arm for themselves from the parts of the prince's discarded mannequins, and then sewn it onto their body with the diamond strings threaded through a sharp needle. That was the needle Sonny was currently staring at, and the divine light on it was emanated by the remnant traces of the thief's blood still left on its surface. But who was the thief, and why was Sonny connected to their severed arm by a golden string of fate? Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then reached for the needle, but suddenly froze. The shadow left behind to monitor the harrowing rot had noticed something. The black, ulcerous flesh was changing. Chapter 449,000 Years of Hunger. Here we go. Sonny faced the stairwell and stood motionless, looking at the black rot through his trembling shadow. Sensing something, Saint turned around, too. The tip of her sword hesitantly rose into the air. The next few moments were going to decide whether he was going to live or die, or maybe be condemned to a fate much worse than death. One level lower, the harrowing corruption that had been spreading from the severed arm of a deity was moving. The black ulcerous flesh was rising and falling, as if in the throes of death or transformation. Sonny gritted his teeth, waited for a second, and then breathed out with immeasurable relief. Dying, it's dying. It felt as though he had been sentenced to execution, only for a pardon to arrive at the last possible moment, when the rope was already pressing on his neck. Indeed, the terrifying rot was withering. As thousands of years that passed since it was locked in the obsidian tower caught up with it, the devouring corruption appeared to be dying of starvation. The stone surface assimilated into it convulsed and wriggled, as if consumed by pain. The silver brazier was melting. The growths of the bulbous black flesh were slowly receding, their color turning ashen. The process was slow, but at the edges of the patch of corruption, the rot was already turning into wisps of darkness, which then disappeared without a trace. As tension left Sonny's body, he couldn't help but sway a little. Good, something has gone my way at last. Before, he had been considering his options and finding no possible way to escape from the rot if it was to start spreading. He had considered trying to damage it with broken oath, but doubted that anything the awakened memory could do would work, considering that even the original owner of the seven-fingered hand resorted to severing their limb completely instead of trying to destroy the spreading corruption. He had also entertained the idea of using the cruel sight, which was now infused with divine flame, but something told Sonny that the massive brazier where the rot had taken root had once been full of it too. That was apparent from how charred the severed arm of the transient deity was. If even thousands of years of burning and annihilating divine flame couldn't destroy or stop the black rot, then what hope did he have? In the end, though, the corruption had destroyed itself. Neither divine flame nor an actual deity had been able to damage the black rot, but its hunger and the relentless nature of time were. Thank gods. Sonny inhaled deeply and tiredly closed his eyes. The corruption was slowly dying. Pieces of it slowly disappearing, bit after bit. All that was left behind were the damaged stone and the memory of primal horror. He grimaced, but also damn the gods. Why would they allow for such a thing to exist? Shaking his head, Sonny wiped the sweat off his face, then turned around and walked back to the stone pedestal. Reaching with one hand, he picked up the long, sharp needle and stared at it for some time. The needle seemed to have been made out of polished iron, but due to the traces of divine blood absorbed by it, the cold metal had assumed a faint golden shine. Sonny looked at it for a long time, trying to understand if this was a mundane item or some mystical artifact. In the end, he had to admit that he had no clue. The needle did not turn into a memory like Weaver's mask had. He didn't see any spell weave inside of it either. However, the needle also didn't feel like a simple object. It was strange. He thought for a bit, then summoned the covetous coffer and carefully placed the needle inside. The skeins of diamond string also went in, easily disappearing into the gluttonous box. I will have time to study it later. With that, Sonny hesitated for a bit, then reluctantly headed back toward the second level of the great pagoda. He was going to watch the harrowing rot die, and then try to approach the severed hand of the mysterious deity. Some time later, Sonny was sitting on the lowest step of the stairs leading to the great hall, staring at the massive brazier in its center. What was left of it, to be precise. The devouring corruption took its sweet time dying. Even the hunger of thousands of years could not destroy it so easily, it seemed. The black flesh writhed and pulsated, disappearing little by little. Several times, veins of rot tried to spread outward, clearly sensing the presence of a living being nearby and lusting to absorb it him. But the profane infestation was too weak to overcome the entropic power of starvation. The silver brazier, which had long ago become a part of the horrid corruption, melted and fell apart, then disappeared into wisps of pure darkness. Soon it was clear that the rot was not long for this world. All that remained from its vile flesh were a few growths infused into the severed arm itself. Staring at the disintegrating rot, Sonny felt both deep, primal terror and a strange compulsion to try and damage it a little in hopes of being credited for the kill by the spell. Who knew what reward he would receive? But in the end, Sonny remained still. Firstly, because he wasn't even sure that the corruption would be acknowledged by the spell as a creature. He didn't really know if that thing was alive, for the lack of a better word. If it was an entity, a process, or a manifestation of some profane law that he didn't know of. Secondly, because he was absolutely unwilling to approach the rot, even now that it was dying. He wasn't even willing to let his memories get anywhere near it. The memories were connected to his soul, after all. Who knew if that thing was capable of spreading to a memory and then to his very soul through the invisible link? So, Sonny simply sat silently and waited. After a while, the corruption finally died. The charred flesh of the severed arm became ashen, crumbled into dust, and finally disappeared in wisps of deep, impenetrable darkness. All that remained was the empty hall, the patch of mangled obsidian in its center, a single piece of pristine alabaster bone shining with blinding gold radiance, a sole phalanx of a finger. Sonny waited for a few minutes, gathering his courage, then sighed and stood up. He glanced at the small bone, scowled, and walked toward it. It was time to see what fate had in store for him. Chapter 450, Alabaster Phalanx. Sonny stepped into the patch of mangled obsidian and slowly approached the alabaster phalanx, then kneeled beside it and lingered, studying its golden shine. He was trying to determine if any sign of the harrowing rot remained, but also felt pulled toward the radiant bone and found it hard to look away. All of this insanity, just for that little piece of bone. What secrets does it hold? He hesitated for a moment, then reached down and picked up the phalanx. Sonny had instinctively expected it to crumble into a torrent of white sparks, and hear the spell proclaim that he had acquired a new memory, just like what had happened with Weaver's mask, that memory being, perhaps, another drop of ichor. But nothing of the sort happened. The bone felt cold and smooth to the touch. There was still marrow inside, wet and infused with bright golden radiance. Sonny tilted his head, stumped. What was he supposed to do now? In hindsight, the fact that the phalanx was not going to turn into a memory was rather sensible, obvious even. After all, memories were simply copies of real items recreated by the spell, just like echoes were copies of actual creatures or items conjured by it from scratch, following some unknown principle. However, this was the real deal. The alabaster bone had nothing to do with the spell. It wasn't a recreation. It was the original. Sonny frowned, feeling unsure about how he was supposed to proceed. Then, a certain scene suddenly appeared in his mind. Back in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, Saint stood above the rusted remains of the Black Knight, holding a black gem in her hand. With a hint of some dark emotion burning in her ruby eyes, she raised the gem to her mouth and bit into it. Before he could fully process the implications of this image, Sonny followed a strange instinct. Without allowing himself time to think about it, he opened his mouth, put the phalanx inside, and swallowed it. What? He blinked a couple of times. What did I just do? Sonny stared at his empty hand, in which a divine bone had been just a few seconds ago, with wide eyes. And then it was as though a furious fire ignited in his chest. Crap! Sonny tumbled to the floor, feeling a harrowing pain permeate his entire being. It was the unbearable agony he knew and remembered all too well, the feeling of his very nature being forcibly changed into something that it was never meant to be, that nothing was ever meant to be, or maybe simply not allowed to. It was the opposite of the euphoric sense of rebirth the awakened experienced after completing the first nightmare or returning from the dream realm for the first time. The feeling of your whole body being torn apart and reassembled, only to be torn apart once more. Arg. Here we go again. The torturous suffering he was experiencing was very similar to what he had gone through after consuming the drop of Weaver's blood. Back then it had felt as though every muscle, every fiber, every molecule in his body were destroyed and recreated over and over again, becoming slightly different with each time. The agony had been especially excruciating when it came to his eyes, which had felt as though two white-hot rods were inserted into them. This time was different. The pain was concentrated in his spine, in his bones, in the marrow permeating them. His fingers in particular felt as though there was molten, incandescent, liquid metal flowing through them. Sonny shrieked. Damn it. God damn it all. It hurt so much. However, the torture did not last as long as it had back in the branches of the soul-devouring tree. After a few more minutes of it, Sonny felt the blood weave suddenly come alive and rush through his veins, absorbing the harrowing heat and then carrying it to every cell of his body. Slowly but surely, the pain lessened. But the process of transformation continued. Sonny sprawled on the floor, covered in sweat and breathing heavily. He could feel himself changing. It was a strange and extremely unpleasant sensation, one suffused with a feeling of profound wrongness, but not as devastatingly excruciating as it had been just a few seconds ago. Hell, that was rough. His voice was hoarse and creaky. Sonny glanced to the side and noticed Saint, who was standing silently above him and looking away with cold indifference. Such heartlessness. No sympathy at all. At least the happy shadow seemed very concerned about him, or itself. It was pacing nervously, turning to Sonny from time to time and timidly offering its encouragement. The gloomy shadow was currently wrapped around his body, so it couldn't offer any feedback. He had no doubt that it would have just mocked him anyway. That jolly guy is really irritating. I would rather be mocked, curse it all. Gritting his teeth, Sonny closed his eyes and endured the unpleasant feeling of his body being demolished and reconstructed as best as he could. After a long while, which felt like an eternity, it was all finally over. A deep feeling of relief spread through Sonny's body. It felt more solid somehow. Strong, firm, resilient. Just what have I? The voice of the spell suddenly thundered in the solemn dark hall, interrupting his thoughts. Was he imagining it, or had there been a note of dark excitement in it? It said, "One of your attributes has evolved. You have acquired a new attribute." You don't say. Sonny struggled to sit up and then hurriedly summoned the runes. What have I done to myself this time? The runes shimmered in the air in front of him, and Sonny quickly looked at the cluster describing his attributes. Attributes: faded, ember of divinity. Wait, ember? This was new. He concentrated on the ember of divinity and studied the string of runes. Attribute description. Deep within your soul, an ember of divinity shines, almost ready to erupt into a radiant flame. Huh. So I have an even higher affinity to divinity now. Makes sense. He had just swallowed a phalanx of an actual deity, after all. Impatient, Sonny turned back to the list of attributes, where 3 more remained. The first 2 he knew all too well. Child of Shadows, Blood Weave. But the third one was new. At the very end of the list, several new runes appeared. Sonny held his breath and read, Attribute: Bone Weave.